Establishing a successful permaculture orchard, it takes time, it takes money, and most of all, it takes. I went through the steep learning curve to save you the time and money. Learning about orcharding, learning about irrigation, about soil biology, animal husbandry, pruning and trading, systems design. These are the lessons that I'm going to share with you, and they are valuable. The first lesson is to know yourself. What do you love to do? Do you love animals? Do you love plants? Maybe vegetables, and you love the vegetable garden and eat the product. Maybe you love trees. Do you love to design something? Maybe you love flowers. Hey, if you love flowers, then focus on that. You can integrate it, but know yourself, please. Another important lesson is to know your site. What climate are you in? Are you in a tropical environment? Are you in a desert environment? Are you in a temperate climate like we are? That's the basic. Then, what's your soil like? Are you on heavy clay that will hold water and you can easily make ponds? Or are you like us on a very, very sandy site? That's all important. We like to say miracle farms, just add water and things grow. When you know your site, look around, find what grows naturally all by itself like a weed on your site. For us, it's grapes and cherries. They grow like weeds. That's what you want. You want an orchard of weeds. You say, I don't want weeds. Yes, you do want. You want them to grow like a weed. What do you do for a weed? You don't fertilize, you don't plant it, you don't even seed it. They come up on their own. So if you figure out what are the plants that grow like weeds on your site, you are well on your way to the most easy planting you can get. It may not be what you want to grow, but it's certainly going to be what is going to grow the easiest. You know your site. You're getting to know it. No site is perfect. If your site gives you ice cubes like we've had, then stop, gather them up, and make some iced tea. Work with your site. Don't let it beat you down. Another valuable lesson is to know your enemies. Whatever crop you're growing, you will have challenges. It could be insects, it could be disease. This was a 4,000 tree monoculture organic apple orchard. We learned a lot about insects because we had a lot of them. Now in the permaculture orchard, we still have a few. There's 3 insects that still affect, and we trap for 2 of them, whether it's codling moth or apple maggot fly. We use traps. So that's a possible strategy. But for your enemies, you need to know what's their life cycle. When do they come out that they can affect your crop? Where do they overwinter? What are vulnerable periods that you can catch them or reduce their numbers? What are allies? Birds and insects that will decrease their numbers. I like to tell people, just do it. Just start. Never will the situation be perfect and everything aligns for you to start your permaculture orchard. Maybe you don't have enough money. Great, that's a good problem. Why? Because you have to be creative, you have to learn a few skills, and the best place to apply it to save a lot of money is by starting your own nursery. We had 1,000 trees in here this spring, and we pulled them out and we put in some vegetables. Great, but start your nursery. This isn't a large space. In 70 by 30 feet, you could grow 1,000 trees. That's how we originally started. If you want to learn more how to propagate, check out our propagation course at permaculture.study. Start for free today. Don't remove your existing trees. Overgraft them. Maybe you have the misfortune of starting with a tree that's there and it's really full of disease, or it's not a good fruit that you want to eat. You don't have to tear it out like I did. You can cut it at a certain point and overgraft it, or top work it as it's often called. Within 3 years of overgrafting, you will have fruit starting. Starting your orchard in a place where you already had some trees and overgrafting is one option, but the best is to start in a blank slate. Start where you have nothing. Start in an open area. Much better than starting over. But the best way to start is to just start today, period. In the early years when this was a organic monoculture apple orchard, members would come pick, because it was a membership you pick, and they would gather their bushel of apples, and then they would come and say, "What more do you have?" I'd say, "I have a couple of more kinds of apples." No, what more diversity other than apples that you have? And I realized I had a huge hole, and whether for you in the backyard, you would see that same hole. Well, I got some apples, but what more do you have? You want diversity. And that led us to redesign and looking at the system design for the whole orchard. There's a couple of important concepts for the system design of the permaculture orchard. The first one I call trios. What's trio? Three trees as the pattern of the planting. You never look at it as I plant one tree and another tree. As I had in the organic apple orchard, it was all the same tree, many hundreds. That doesn't work. I've been there, I've done that. Please do not plant as a monoculture. But in the pattern of trios, you can have, in this case, a plum tree, and then a pear tree, and then a nitrogen-fixing tree, in this case, a honey locust, but there's many species you could use as nitrogen-fixing or support species. Use trios. That's your tree pattern. It solves 60 to 80% of all the problems is by that very design pattern that's repeated. You don't have to repeat the same cultivar. You could change it. In the case of pear trees here, we have 4 different cultivars in this row. What do? We put the first trio has 1 pear tree cultivar, cultivar 2, 3, 4 in successive trios, and then we start again. The 5th trio would have cultivar 1 and so on. So right in that design, even though it's pears, they vary. They can be different, and that variation is so important. But it's not just, there's more. Wait. We have the horizontal, that's what I call these, the horizontal trio. But then there is a vertical trio, which is with a tree, you have something more. So we aim to put 2 shrubs, fruiting shrubs, underneath each tree, and then combine that with a whole range, at least 10 perennials per tree. That could be flowers, it could be perennial vegetables, it could be herbs. You could put annual vegetables, and please do in the first years, not once the orchard is established. At least in our climate, vegetables need full sun. They don't do well here. But maybe if you're in a just starting or in a really hot and dry climate, you can try putting vegetables under your fruit trees. The second important, vital concept in the system design of the permaculture orchard is what I call the grocery store concept. You're familiar with the grocery store. You walk down an aisle and you have 2 rows where you'll pick 1 of these and 2 of those, or a couple of pounds of those. The same idea applies to the permaculture orchard. That's why I call it grocery store. It's logical. And it comes from when this was a monoculture organic apple orchard. We would harvest several rows in a same 10-day window. So a certain cultivar, let's say Spartan, was harvested the last 10 days of September. That was logical. I like that. You go in, you get it all, and you're done. Then when we integrated all this variety, trios and many species in a same orchard block, how does this make sense? I simply grouped all the trees that I wanted to plant by their harvest window. So we use 10-day windows, 3 10-day windows for every month. The first 10 days, the middle 10 days, the last 10 days. This one is the bottom, so it's the last 10 days of August. So I know that this row and the next row are harvested at the end of August. If you don't have enough trees to put in a whole row, no problem. Make a row or a couple of rows to have sections. So the first 2 trios, for example, would be harvested early August. Then your next, maybe one trio, is the middle of August. And then maybe you don't have anything at the end of August, no problem. The next window of harvest could be early September, and so on and so on. So you just need to know, and that's the vital piece, you need to know when it's harvested. And if you look through a catalog and look by that cultivar of fruit you're looking for, it will usually give you when is the main harvest date. Find that, group them together by the same harvest date, and next thing you know, when you plant it, you've got a grocery store. But wait, there's more, as the commercial says. You have your tree harvest windows. That's the basis of it. But there's more than one harvest period in a row. You have your tree, which is the main one. But then you did have fruiting shrubs that are placed under. So that gives you another period of harvesting in the same year. And you can combine it with your perennials. In this case, it's an edible flower, a daylily, that is harvested even earlier. So we aim to get 3 harvest windows for every row every year. How do you start? Where do you start? Well, you know your site hopefully by now. You know your soil. You know what you may be lacking. Perhaps it's compost that you need to add. We even added coffee grounds that we got from our local coffee shops, and we spread coffee over everything as an amendment before we replanted. When you plant, what you want is some way of protecting the trees. We use a lot of this golden stuff, as much as we can get our hands on. It's wood chips from pruning crews. Use this as mulch. It will allow your young plants a couple of years of break before the grass can invade, and it will add some vital organic matter. There's 4 phases to establishing or planting your permaculture orchard. The first one is to put your trees in, which is the backbone, which is the structure of your orchard. Put them in, plant them, mulch them, absolutely. Then the second phase is add shrubs. I like to put a shrub on each side of a tree, 3 feet or a meter away on one side and another one on the other side in the row is a good strategy. A third stage would be to add your perennials. So for each tree, I aim to put in 10 perennial plants. 5 on each side is a good rule. But that could be perennial vegetables, vines, herbs. It could even be annual vegetables. In your first 3 years, you could grow a lot of vegetables around your plant. The goal is to surround your tree with plants that will produce something, because otherwise there will be plants that will come in no matter what. A fourth phase is to establish your structures for your allies. This is your bird nest boxes, for example, and have a range of hole sizes and have a lot. I would say minimum, even for a small yard, put in 10 nest boxes. I don't have room for 10. Yes, there'll only be 5 pair at most using it, because every bird uses 2 nest boxes. So get a variety, put it in. You can put in all those 4 phases at once. You don't have to phase it like I did over years. Put it all in at once. And I would now even recommend do a smaller area that you can finish all 4 phases. You got your trees planted. Hopefully you've mulched them well. Congratulations. One of the most important things to starting your trees off right is to learn training. Maybe you've heard of Solomon and his great wisdom. Solomon had a proverb that says, train up a child in the way he should go, that even when he's old, he'll not depart from it. The same wisdom applies to a tree. Train up a tree's branches while they're young, and even when those branches are old, they won't depart from it. Training will save you a lot of time in pruning. Learn the difference, training versus pruning. Want to learn more about pruning or training? Check out the pruning course at permaculture.study. Start today for free. You may have new trees, and then you get a lot of sun. Take advantage of the open area around your trees. At least for the first 3 years, you can grow a range of annual and even perennial vegetables. Because if you're not growing something under there, under your trees, while there's sun, there's other plants that will try to take that same space. So you choose what you're going to grow around your trees. Maintenance can make or break your project. You've done a great job using trios, using the grocery store concept, planting trees, planting shrubs, planting perennials. How you maintain it can make or break your project. I worked as a landscape architect with over 100 clients, and I've seen that what will kill a good design in a project is improper maintenance. And the most important part of maintenance is your edge. I maintain over 10 miles of edge in the permaculture orchard. I consider an edge anytime you go from one use space, in this case grass, to another use space, in this case our plantings of trees, shrubs, and perennials. Where those two areas meet can cause a lot of annoyance or frustration. So make sure you have an edge that is really low maintenance. Pareto principle applies. 80% of your surface will only require 20% of your maintenance time, but 20% of your area will take you 80% of your maintenance time. So aim to eliminate that 20% high maintenance area. Just get rid of it and have a low maintenance planting, because the only ones who make money with maintenance are the ones who are hired out to maintain. I love Sepp Holzer's take on it, where he says, if you don't want a pig to do the job, then you inherit the job of the pig. Well, do you want to inherit the job of all the caterpillar eating birds or all the pollinating insects? I guarantee you don't. So give them something. Add at least some nest boxes so that you can attract birds, bumblebees, and wasps to nest in your permaculture orchard. They will save you maintenance time. Do you add irrigation? Should you add irrigation? If you're not in a really reliable rainfall area, irrigation is a great insurance policy. You may not have to have it. You probably don't have to have it when your trees are older. But the first 3 years as your trees are getting established, it's just a good insurance to have the ability to put rain. You could use irrigation pipe, you could use drip tape, you could use soaker hose, which I really recommend for a smaller surface. Put it in, automate it, and forget about watering by hand. Stop being a spectator. Get some diligence involved and put in at least 2 trios. That's the start. Get 2. If you have room, put more than 2 trios. And pretty soon you can expand to 100 feet of trios if you have the space. With 100 feet, you will have more than enough for your whole family's fruit needs for the year. And pretty soon you'll have extra. And my goal for you is that you would experience what abundance is like, and that you would have so much more that now you have to share with others. It takes time, it takes money, it takes patience, but most of all, it takes lots and lots of plants. So start a nursery today. What if I told you you could grow your favorite berry at home or in your yard for free using this ancient technique? And so what's this ancient technique? Well, people have observed nature since the beginning of time. Certainly more in the past when people lived on the land. They observed how when shrubs grow and produce fruit, the branches gradually bend down and touch the soil. With time, this branch would grow roots and create a second shrub, which could be transplanted. This technique is great if you want to save money. And it'll work on any shrub as long as it's about 3 years old, and I'll get back to that in a bit, how to age them. By the way, it works really well on vines. You want to start a vineyard? Great on grapes and other vines. But look before you buy. Look at how many branches you have that you could bend. And that's important. Realize Using this technique, you're gonna multiply this plant exact copies of it because it's a vegetative propagation. It's not like a seedling. If you took the seed of the fruit that's grown off of this, you won't get likely the exact same thing. But if you like this shrub, you said, I love this one, I love this cultivar, then that's exactly what you want because you'll get more of the exact copy. They're clones. One thing I love about this technique is it's so easy. I said pay attention to branches that bend. Why? Because if you can bend the branch to the soil, then you'll get another plant from that branch, or you could. Here's some examples from branches that we bent last year. See the curve? And this is where the rocks come in. So what happens to this branch after a while? Oh, it's grown right underneath. Here is the branch, and here is all the roots. So I could harvest these already. I cut back this piece because that's where it was. And I've got one, well, actually I've got two potential branches. So I could take this one, and it's got a bit of root, and I've got this one, and it has a lot of root. You say, okay, I'll take two, why not? Twofer, it's a twofer. So that's what you'll get in the results. Is that easy? Hey, if you like easy, stay tuned to the end. I'll give you a bonus technique. One tip about these roots, you see them all? It's a cloudy day, not too bad. If it's sunny, please don't expose these roots to drying sun. Keep them covered, keep them in a bucket and covered. That'll give you much better success in replanting these. If you want to learn even more about propagation and all the different techniques, check out our propagation course at permaculture.study and start it today for free. All right, this is where your rock comes in. No, not that rock, this rock. I said you look for bendy branches. So all you need to do is bend the branch down, let it touch the soil, and put a rock. Ideally, take some mulch or soil and cover it. Don't cover the tip, just cover all along of the stem, and it will make roots. Good tip though is keep a few rocks at the base of your shrub so that next year, if you have another branch, you go, oh, look, here's another branch. You just take your branch, bend it, and rock. Rock and bend and rock. Put some soil, put some mulch. And next year, just like this one was one from last year, you'll have a rooted shrub, a clone, the exact same one. Is that easy? Could you do this? Absolutely. Do it right in your garden. If you have enough of these branches, pretty soon you'll have all the shrubs you want, and you'll have extra, so you can start giving some away or selling them to friends and neighbors. Here's another tip. If you find that, you know what, the birds eat a lot of the fruit, then give them to your neighbors. If you have neighbors all around who have these shrubs, the birds coming from outside of your little area will land at your neighbors first. They'll eat their fruit, and chances are, because you're in the middle of the area, you will have more fruit to enjoy. I promised you a bonus tip. If you are doing layering, take time to combine it with some pruning. If you're pruning, then keep an eye out for vigorous one-year-old shoots. You can cut those off and use them to stick as a cutting. Well, how and why is 1-year-old? Look at the color, and at the end of every year, you have a series of rings on the trunk. Look for those. So this is 1 year. If you go down the branch, you'll see another set of rings. That's 2 years, and beyond that is 3 years. If you just stick this cutting, you want about a pencil size, and cut the top flat if you need to, and cut the bottom at an angle. stick that in the ground. You'll get about 60% success rate on rooting of these kind of cuttings. If you dip this in a rooting hormone, you'll get about 80%. And if you want to go to the extra mile, make some willow water, add willow water and rooting hormone, you should get to 90% success in rooting. Do you have fruit trees? Do you want fruit trees? Do you hesitate to have fruit trees because they're too much work? Here's 40 tips to help you have low maintenance fruit trees. Maintenance can eat up a lot of time on your property, on your homestead or on your farm. And maintenance never makes you money unless you provide a service of maintenance. I've been growing fruit trees for 30 years, the first 15 of which were a monoculture organic apple orchard with 4,000 trees, which we eventually tore out and replanted as a permaculture orchard. How can I maintain 6 acres of orchard with an average of less than half a day per week? That's why I'm giving you my 40 best tips to have low maintenance fruit trees. The first point about where to put your trees is where you have good drainage. Good drainage means don't plant them next to a pond. Dig at least 4 feet or 1.2 meters to be sure that there's no groundwater right there. Because in the end, putting trees where there is water, where it's too wet, trees will have especially disease because fungus love moisture. So avoid poor drainage and look for your best drainage. Avoid frost pockets. You can't imagine the number of people who I've seen planting their orchards or their fruit trees and then they get frosted out. Avoid the low spots on your land. That's where cold air gathers. Avoid being just above a large building or a large forest that can hold that cold air. Ideally, you want to be on a slope where the water and the air, especially the air, can drain freely down the slope. That's what good drainage is. Look at classic orchard sites. This isn't a classic site because we're in flat land, but this is what we've got. In the end, you'll use what you've got, but choosing the right spot where you are is good. Avoid shady areas. Temperate climate fruit trees do not grow in the shade of a large shade tree. They just don't. We're not in the tropics or subtropics. So make sure your trees are not going to be put under a big shade tree or on the north side or south side, depending on your climate, of a big building that's going to cause shade. Fruit trees need at least 8 hours. If you can't grow really thick grass, then that's not going to be a good place for your fruit trees. Sun is good for fruit trees. What kind of soil? Well, no two soils are exactly alike. Best is gravelly loam. A mixed soil that's got some gravel that drains really well. If your soil is the kind that really cakes into big clumps with a lot of clay, that may not be the best soil. You want something that's really loose and especially well drained. Remember, if you're not sure, just make sure it's well drained, which gravelly loams are best. How to design? The first thing is flee the monoculture. I know we had monoculture. It doesn't work to be low maintenance. If you want to put all the work in, yeah, you can have like we had all apple trees. But I can tell you, having both, having had monoculture and having a diversity, nature does not like monoculture. It always, look around, it always has a diversity. There's not just one kind of plant. Nature always wants to bring in other plants. They play better together, they work together, they associate together, and it just works. You want low maintenance, you want to save time. Flee the monoculture. One of the most important tips for how to design is using trios. That was a nitrogen fixer. This is a cherry shrub, and this is an apple tree. A nitrogen fixer, a fruit tree, a fruit tree. A nitrogen fixer, fruit tree, nut tree. Nitrogen fixer, nut, nut. You can go nuts. The key is fleeing monoculture means planting a diversity. We alternate our trios. It just works, trust me. One of the beauties of using trios is it solves the problems before they even become a problem. Case in point, trios provide better pollination. Here's our trio with a fruit tree, in this case, Alexander apple. And then we repeat in the next trio with another apple tree, in that case, Belmac. 2 trios, 2 different cultivars or varieties or kinds, better pollination. I get so many comments of people who say, I planted my one fruit tree 5 years ago, 7 years ago, and I've never had fruit. Well, most fruit trees need a partner. Fruit trees to produce need to go through fruit sex to give you some fruit. So have trios with different cultivars of the same species, and you pretty well guarantee you'll have better pollination and better production. An important point about how to design is using vertical trios. Yes, the trees, vitally important, but now let's go tree and below. Have you ever had something growing under your tree or under a fruit tree that you didn't want? Well, why don't you plant things that you want and they'll keep the other plants away? So we use trees, shrubs, and these are fruiting shrubs, and then perennial plants. Rhubarb, onion, daylily, flowers, herbs, perennial vegetables. The choice is quite big, and if you're in a warmer climate than we are, you even have a bigger selection of plants you can use. So plant something you choose so that you don't have to deal with plants that are coming up that you don't want. You've used vertical trios, wonderful. Horizontal trios in the trees, wonderful. What about a vine layer? In this case, making your nitrogen fixing tree become fruitful. Some of you may be able to grow things that you can eat from your fruit trees, your nitrogen fixing trees. But if you can't, you can still make them be able to produce fruit. So we put vines, perennial vines, things like grape and kiwi, to grow up our nitrogen fixing trees. In the first years, for almost 5 years, we were able to grow annual vegetables and using these trees to climb up. So we put things like peas and climbing beans and cucumbers so that they could use a support that we didn't have to set up. We did by planting it, and gradually transform it to perennial plants like grape and kiwi. So use your trees that you've already planted and make them produce fruit for you. Another point about how to design is plant what you can finish. I didn't do that. I planted trees because we had acres to plant and we were planting trees for 3 years. I would suggest, and that's what we do now, is plant your trees, plant your shrubs, plant your perennials, and even plant your annual vines to start, just so that do as much as you can finish, because the plants working together just will give you a better pop. They'll grow better while there's more light than if you wait 5 years to plant your shrubs or your perennials, and now they get a lot less light. So it will give your plants a good start, and they'll be off and running together with your trees. So plant what you can finish. A final tip about how to design, and it's so important, it's one of the most often comments and questions I get. How far do I space? I always say, when in doubt, space them out. Spacing is important. You really want your fruit tree to have all the room it needs. You don't want it crowding into your next tree. Give it room. And you say, well, how much room? Each rootstock cultivar combination will kind of have a spacing, and then add a few feet, add a meter. You're not sure? Give them room. Why? Because you can always fill in the space in between with something like a bigger fruiting shrub. But if they're too tight, your trees won't get good aeration, and aeration is so important. Airflow reduces disease. Solve the problem right in the beginning. That's what you want. Low maintenance, not have to intervene afterwards. So give them the room, figure it out, calculate, measure, go check with somebody who's got the same combination, and give it a little more room. Because in the end, you'll never regret you spaced them out, but you'll always regret you planted them too tight together. Now some tips about what to choose. Look around. I always say grow what grows like a weed. Why? Because how much work do you put into weeds? None. Did you water? No. Did you fertilize? No. Did you spray for it? Maybe. But the idea is weeds grow without any effort on your part. What if the fruit trees, the fruit shrubs, the perennial plants you grow like a weed? Listen, there's nothing easier than a weedy fruit tree. Look around your property. Look on the ground. Look in the hedgerows. Look nearby. Ditches are a great example of an area that's not mowed, not disturbed for a while. What comes up naturally? If you're growing, blackberries are growing and will take over your yard if you do nothing, then I'd say grow some thornless blackberries. Why? Because they grow like a weed on your place. Here, apples don't grow like a weed, but cherries and grape, absolutely. When we put cherries and grapes, they grow like weeds. That's what you want. If you want really low maintenance, really easy, and really time-saving, look around, do your homework, get a plant ID guide or app, and have it identify plants that are fruiting or provide something else like perennials that grow so easily. Grow what grows like a weed. You'll be so glad, because you'll have to beat them down. How much work is that? Well, maybe a little, but it's a lot easier doing that than having to intervene for all the problems they would come up with otherwise. If you have a small space, plant your fruit trees that have dwarf rootstock. Look at the tag. It should say what kind of rootstock, and if you're not sure, ask around or do some research just to find out. Almost every fruit tree nowadays has dwarfing rootstock available. Why? Because you'll be able to get your trios in even if you have a small space. So select dwarfing, and you could put any cultivar but on a dwarfing. So the final result, your tree will be smaller. You can go much smaller than this. You can get trees that'll be your height or smaller. Try that if you're in a tight or close or small space. Another point about what to choose, please choose disease-resistant fruit trees. It's nothing better to be easier than to have a tree that you don't have to spray for disease because they're resistant. Every tree, every fruit you look at, there are going to be cultivars or varieties that if you do the research, you say, oh, look at this one is resistant to this disease, that disease, sometimes many diseases. That is the ideal. Plant something that you don't have to be spraying. It's so much easier, so much easier. You like that, eh? Not being sprayed? Absolutely. Disease resistant is the way to go. An important point about choosing what you want to grow, try, if you have room for 2 of the same fruit tree or 3, maybe you could put 3 trios, try to get an early season, mid-season, and late season producing fruit tree. You'll extend your harvest season. One example, our apple trees, we start in mid-July to harvest, and it goes right up to mid-October. So 3 full months we can harvest apples. And you can do that. You can have a tree, some of them produce or hold their fruit for longer. But do a little bit of searching. Yes, get disease resistant. Yeah, maybe get it on a dwarf rootstock. And then choose early, mid, or early and late, or early and middle. Whatever combination, depending on 2 or 3 trees you could put in, and then get that variation. It'll be so much better because you're not swamped with 3 trees that produce at the same time. Instead, your trees will produce over a longer period, and you get to enjoy the benefits of a long eating harvest. Grow some perennial vegetables, herbs, even flowers under your fruit trees. But things that you can eat are so much nicer. Yeah, perennial flowering plants, if you can eat the flowers, fantastic. But the key with perennial vegetables under fruit trees is that they tend to produce early in the season. They're spring plants. And it's a great complement. If you do a vegetable garden, you now start really early in the spring, harvesting already, and it goes on with your annual production. And did I say they're perennial? What does that mean? I love the idea of perennial, where I'm going to do the effort of planting it once, and I'm harvesting this one for 15 years. That I like. Plant a vegetable once, then harvest for years to come. That's a winner. A last tip about what to choose is never stop experimenting with species and cultivars. You may have a few, that's wonderful, but don't stop unless you're out of room, but still try other perennials, try other plants. Why? Because nothing beats easy. If you experiment and you come upon a pear tree or a plum tree or an apple tree or a cultivar that really does well and grows like what? Grows like a weed, then how easy is that? You say, oh, I don't do anything, and that thing just produces and produces year after year. Isn't that what you're after? And it absolutely is possible. But you sometimes have to do the experimenting to find out what that plant is. Now, you've chosen where is the best place. You've designed your planting properly, wisely, hopefully, and you've chosen what would be the best plants to put in. Now it's time to plant. I like to say plant simply. And the first tip for that is don't amend your hole. You make a hole to plant, don't put all kinds of things in. Oh, you should put this and you should put that and you should put this. And you read about it, you hear about it from wherever you buy your trees, but realize most people talking about amending the hole or adding something in the hole probably have those things to sell you. So avoid amending the hole. That's a really not time-proven, yeah, it is a time-proven tip. The next tip is make the hole twice the size of the tree root ball, the tree pot, or the roots. Why? Because you want to loosen some soil, ideally twice the size and even twice the depth of that, so that as the tree roots get in, they quickly start to grow. And as you dig this soil out and you plant, put the same soil back in. And that's so important. I've seen trees die because the soil that was put in was not the same soil of what's there. And especially if you're in a heavier soil, it's pretty unforgiving if you put a lighter soil or an amendment in the hole. So make it bigger and use the same soil in the hole. When do you plant now? You're gonna make the hole, you're gonna plant. Listen, if you've got a potted plant, you can pretty well plant it at any time, but the best time for potted trees is in the fall, just as the leaves are falling. So your tree will actually really root well before winter comes around. If you're dealing with a bare rooted, you can get them sometimes in the early spring. Those are best planted early in the spring because the tree will quickly have the start, will put on some leaves, and then will grow. I used to say plant them in the fall, but actually bare root is best in the spring. Another trick for planting simply is put your amendments on top after you planted. So you planted the tree and you wanted to put amendments, and that's fine, but don't put them in the hole. Put them after you've planted with the same soil. Put those amendments on top. Why? Because when I'm in doubt, I look, what does nature do? Nature puts the amendments on top. It doesn't bury them down in the hole. Leaves fall, fruit falls, things fall on the surface. So that's where you want to put your amendments. Things like compost, any fertilizer you want to put, anything that you've been sold on the idea of amending, put it on top. It will go down. Doesn't go up, it goes down. Now you're just about complete. What do? You put some mulch. Why mulch? And mulch could be organic mulch, it could be shredded leaves, it could be wood chips. Those are great mulch after. And mulch is a blanket, it's a protector. It reduces the intensity of rain. It actually reduces the amount that frost penetrates. It slows things down and it feeds the plant that you've just put in. So mulch around your trees after you plant. It'll also protect any amendments you put on. So mulch is a great low maintenance, and ideally not just as you plant. Renew your mulch for a few years. I like to say 3 to 5 years after you plant, so that you'll have a really well-established tree, because that's when your tree grows most, is the first 3 to 5 years. Mulch. You've just planted your tree. Congratulations. Now, do you stake or don't you stake? I like to say any tree that's smaller than you, don't stake, please, because staking often is put in and forgotten, and that's the worst thing. You end up with a tree that's flexible above and very rigid below. So if you do stake because your tree is taller, please remove the stake in one season. If you put it in the spring, certainly by fall, remove it. If you put it in the fall, certainly by spring, remove it. So steak is great to eat, but be careful about putting it to hold your fruit tree. Congratulations, you've gotten this far. You're planting, you planted your tree. Don't just leave it at that point. Put a tree guard around it. Guard from what? You want to guard from rodents. If you're at all in rabbit country or bull country, a guard put on that will last for years is a great bit of insurance. Protects the tree bark from those gnawing rodents. And hey, we've got these for 30 years on different trees, and you know what? That's good. Plastic is good. Wire mesh is even better. Long-lasting, durable, and will protect your tree from rodents. Now let's look at some tips to help you maintain. I did say low maintenance, time-saving. Maintenance is really where you can save so much time. One of the things is, if you're having fruit trees and you have grass around them, The key is to mow infrequently or roll. We do roll aisles when the grass gets even taller. One trick is you want to get as much flowering in your grass as possible. The flowers feed the beneficial insects move to the fruit trees and do a great job. So you can attract them with your grassy areas, but that doesn't mean mowing on a lawn schedule. It means giving the grass longer to act more like a meadow so that it'll flower. Mowing at 6 or 8 weeks interval, at least half. So we mow half the aisles and then we come back in 3 weeks or 6 weeks to mow the other half. That gives the grass a chance to grow. Same for rolling. Once they're really in flower, we can roll the aisles. So use your grass to feed your beneficial insects. One other tip about maintaining is you will have some things to weed. So you can weed or transplant. Once your trees and shrubs and perennials get growing, they will often, because you want plants that grow like what? Like weeds. They will grow. And so here's a plum tree, for example. Well, I'm not going to just cut it out. I can dig it up and transplant it. So you will have some weeding, especially for trees, shrubs, and vines, because if you leave them in after 3 years, even if you cut them down, they will regrow. So take them out while their root systems are not so big that you can't remove them, and either get rid of them or transplant them, even better. For maintenance, I love to focus on the 80-20 rule, Pareto principle. 80% of your area will take 20% of your maintenance time. The other times is 20% of your area will take 80% of your maintenance time. So focus on changing, redoing, and ideally getting rid of those 20% areas that are taking a lot of time. You want low maintenance? Focus on the ones that don't take a lot of time. And whatever trick and tip you apply to save you time there, always remember 80-20. It will serve you really well. Every tree has a season. I like to say train your trees while they're young, and forever they'll be low maintenance. What do I mean by train? Well, if it's crooked, don't wait till your tree is large to bring it back into angle, make it straight. Or when it has branches, take the time while they're young to train these branches so that they are horizontal. No, usually below horizontal. That's the simplest trick. It'll avoid so much pruning afterwards. And that's what we're looking at next, tips to help you prune. I like Solomon's wisdom. He said, train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he's old, he will not depart from it. The same goes for a tree. That's why I start with training. If you train the tree in the first 2, 3, 5 years, while the tree is young, when it gets older, it won't depart from it. It will keep its branch angle long-term, an angle that is easy to maintain. My mentor would say, do you want a tree or do you want fruit? This being the trunk and these being the branches. If you want to grow a tree, then that's what happens when your branches are pointing up. They will grow a lot of branches, and chances are a lot of growth on there will be suckers or water sprouts. You want to train them below horizontal so that for the long term, instead of growing new branches, it will grow fruit. And that's the simple, long-term way to save you a lot of time from pruning, is train and then really focus on keeping your tree with downward branches, except for pears. They go horizontal and no lower. The simplest 3-step approach to pruning after you've done a job training your tree is clearing a chimney. Imagine a chimney. You want no branches, no spurs in the chimney, meaning an area from the trunk reaching a distance. Clear out everything, take it off. You don't want branches on that. A chimney lets light come in and it lets air move. Always good things for a fruit tree. And it will give your fruit tree having fruit from the beginning of the branch and not just at the end. So it will be from beginning to end fruitful, not just at the end of the tree. Clear a chimney. You do it once, you really don't have to redo that step for most often 5 years. So it's a quick thing to do and it gives long-lasting results, and it will regrow new branches where they're missing. Step 2 in the 3-step process for pruning the tree is select 12 to 15 branches. Why not more? I want a lot of branches, because most trees do not need more than that to produce a full crop. And having more than that means you'll just have branches conflicting one to the other. Which ones to remove, because a tree will usually give you twice as many. You'll normally have 20 to 25 branches if you've never pruned the tree. Take out the ones that are the most tree-like and favor the ones that are the most fruit-like. Keep that in mind. It will save you so much time in pruning. The 3rd step in the 3-step process is to do a final polish. You've already selected, you have less branches to deal with. You don't go messing with the branch. You do a polish, which is a very simple, and I love this technique. You just go underneath the branch and you remove anything that's under. And how do you do it? You can just pass your hand under, and everywhere you hook on a branch or a spur, you remove it. That's underneath, that comes off. Why? Because now you've done a pruning and you've taken off the branches that are the least favorable and the spurs that are not in full sun. So it does prune each branch, but it's a fast step. And like the chimney, you do it once and you won't have to repolish that branch probably for 5 years as well. So that focuses your pruning to a lot less work. Focus on the angle, do the chimney, and do a polish. An important step to really reduce insect and disease, but mostly insect pressure in your trees, is in the fall, gather the fruit that's fallen. Why? Because if the tree had fruit that were attacked by insect and you let those fruit fall to the ground, the insect comes out of the fruit, goes into the soil, and next spring, where does it have to go? It just looks up and bang, it'll restart the cycle and attack your fruit again. So do a good job, ideally once a week. Clean up the fruit that you didn't pick and that fell to the ground. Clean it up, do a good sanitation under your tree. It will reduce your insect pressure tremendously. If you want to really avoid causing yourself problems, mark your plants, especially your trees, perhaps your shrubs if they're small, and your vines. Mark them where you put them. I mean, just give it a stake, give it a marker, give it some way of knowing so that you don't come back and cut them or uproot them because, oh, I didn't know there was a tree there. I've heard so many cases where, yeah, I planted my little orchard with little trees and my husband came around and just mowed the whole thing down. Mark them in a way that will stand out above the grass so you're not as likely to do that simple maintenance mistake. Here's a couple of observational tips. Look what is around you. The easiest is look at resources that are abundant in your area. Maybe it's grass clippings, maybe it's leaves, maybe it's wood chips. Use them as mulch around your tree, and you'll be adding fertility in a way that really benefits the tree. Mulch is the unsung hero of low maintenance and saving you time long term. Another tip about observing is learn to look especially beneath your trees, because there may be seedlings. And so multiply your plants very simply. You should be able to grow the amount of trees, the amount of plants by 10 times every 2 years. Yes, 10 times, I said that right. You could get seedling trees. You could multiply your shrubs by layering. You could divide your perennials. There's so many simple ways to increase your plants. If you've chosen wisely and you have weeds, then use them as rootstock, use them as a potential new tree, use them to extend your planting. Hey, there's nothing more fun than, look, I got all these plants. Do you want some? And you can share with your friends and family around you and let them get their own orchard started. Let me give you some tips about working with nature's allies. I really say, don't freak out because you see an insect that could be a pest. I used to absolutely hate these caterpillars because they caused so much damage. Before we really redesigned and worked with nature as our allies, now I say you want to keep every pest at a low level, but you want to keep them because they should feed a resident population of predators. Wow, it looks like this is terrible. I've seen it often enough that I know this is not a problem. I hear the birds all around that they're just waiting to come and feast on these to feed their young. So don't freak out about seeing a pest. Give them a bit of time, watch what happens, and if you can maintain a population of all the pests, you'll also maintain a population of their predators that will work for you 24 hours a day in every season, and you can sleep peacefully knowing that, oh my gosh, I have all these caterpillars, and I know they'll be gone very quickly. Anybody home? Anybody home? Add nest boxes. You put them up once, they'll work for you for years. We have almost 300 on 6 acres. And let me tell you, you want to attract every bird that would nest in such a structure. You want them all. And what really happens is when they're feeding their young, they are voracious, especially for caterpillars, and they'll do the work for you. So set up a home for them, and then they will partner with you, saving you time, saving you work. And the maintenance on these is really not a lot. A very simple and really underutilized thing is thinking about insects, not as pests, but thinking about beneficial insects. And one of the things they really need is just a home to multiply in. We leave the space under the trees with all the stems. We don't mow. You think, I don't, what? Look, leaving these stems of the perennials, of the plants, of the shrubs sometimes, leaving those stems here, what it does is it allows them a place to nest. And when a beneficial insect is nesting in here, let me say, they don't fly to your second neighbor. They just fly very close and patrol, and then they'll bring whatever prey they're gathering. So this becomes a focal point. Have focal points throughout under your fruit trees, and you're gonna get so many more beneficial insects working for you. That's what allying with nature is all about. If you've gotten this far, congratulations. You're interested in getting your fruit trees to be low maintenance, to save you time. My final tip is take a look at our masterclass at permaculture.study. It's the product that I wish I had when I started, and that's how we designed it to be the biggest help we could to you, so you will enjoy fruit trees. You'll say, hey, it's not that much work, and there are ways of growing your fruit that is a game changer from the days of thinking monoculture. I was organic, I had monoculture, and this is way better. I wish you have abundance, so check out the Permaculture Orchard Masterclass at permaculture.study, and you can start looking at it today for free. Now let's go with the three ethics of permaculture. This is the core mindset really for permaculture. The first one is earth care, taking care of the earth. We want to take care of the earth. We want it to be better. The reason you're on this course is I'm sure you are concerned about the earth. You want the earth to be better. You want it to be, you just want improvement. So for that, let me open an idea box for you. If I say to you the word sustainable, do you like that? Do you say, yeah, I like sustainable. Sustainable is a good idea. I hate sustainable. You know why? Because it's this. Sustainable is keeping on as we're now doing. Is that really what we want? Do we want to just, yeah, you know, the way it's going is the way it will be? No! Why are we learning this? Why are we doing these efforts? We're doing them so that we can improve, make it better, make it more productive, make the earth sing with abundance and health and harmony. Is that the idea of sustainable? No. Sustainable is this. Let's not even talk about a decline. Like, hopefully, we're over the period where we do harm so that the earth's capacity declines. Like, let's not even think about that one. Sustainable, please don't even make that your minimum. Well, maybe a minimum. But let's focus now on regeneration. Regeneration means it's an increase. It's making it better. It's improving the health of the soils, the air, the waters, the land, the carrying capacity of the habitats. That's regeneration. That's what we should be focused on. That should be our attention. And so you're in this course because you are thinking care of the earth. That's the first ethic of permaculture. But make it the idea that, yes, I want to leave this planet knowing that I've done everything I could to make it better. So I could leave a better legacy for those who come after me. Maybe not even your kids, maybe just your neighborhood, your neighbors, your city, your town, or your larger community. Make it so that you're leaving something that is better. So that's earth care. Second ethic of permaculture is people care. I think, well, of course we should take care of people. Yes. How do we take care of people? Hopefully just make the environment, make the earth care so good that people are taken care of because they're not in lack of food. They're not in lack of resources. There's not a lack, and we can do that through the ethics and through applying permaculture. The third one is limiting consumption and sharing surplus. And I like to add a parenthesis on that when you think, okay, limiting consumption. Well, do we need as much as we think, oh, well, I need this and I need that? First, distinguish between the two things. Is it a need or a want? That's the source of so many problems, is we don't make a distinction. We think need and want. Well, whatever I need, I want, or whatever I want, I need. No, You really want to distinguish the difference between that. Your need is, what do you need? You need some food, you need clothing, and you need shelter. That's our three basic needs. And when we look at habitats for animals, that's the three, that's the core, that's what we focus on. We don't say, what does the animal want? Oh, he wants a better warm bed to sleep in, or he wants, no. He has needs and you meet those needs. You can make them a little more luxurious, just like you can for yourself. But distinguish the difference between a need and a want. Where we miss is distributing surplus. And you think, well, we don't have a surplus. We don't have too much. Imagine a pie, you know. We think a pie is a certain size, and this is what it is. And, you know, I have my piece, you have your piece. But we don't have to look at that little pie, because the pie could be bigger and bigger and bigger, and it could be almost unlimited, because the earth is almost unlimited in its capacity. So the bigger we make the pie, the more we have abundance to distribute a surplus. And let me say one thing about distributing surplus, which people often miss. You think, yeah, distributing surplus to people. And that is good. That we really need to think about that, of producing enough, making our environments healthy enough, abundant enough that we can share a surplus. With people, yes, but we really need to think we're not alone here. We're not the only ones. It's not just people on this planet. So we need to look at sharing that surplus with nature. And that's in all the different levels. What are we doing for the bats? What are we doing for the fish? What are we doing for the birds? Of course, I'm bird brain, so I think about the birds. But there's more to it than just birds. So what are we doing in our design, in our yard, in our homestead, on our property, to make it so that there is extras to share with nature? If you get that right, that solves so many problems. That's why it's three ethics: earth care, people care, and fair share, or sharing of surplus. Whew. That's a big one. That's the three ethics. There's an excellent document you should get. It's The Essence of Permaculture by one of the co-founders, David Holmgren. And it lists, and this is what I'm following in this presentation, is the three ethics and the 12 principles. But take a look at that. It's a super read on understanding better and deeper these core elements of permaculture. If you're enjoying this video and you'd like to see the rest of this course, head on over to permaculture.study or click the link in the description to continue learning today. Let me give you an earworm about gardening, farming, homesteading, even growing houseplants, because it refers to soil and plants. So what's an earworm? I'm not talking about the worm that's found on an ear of corn. That is called corn earworm, but I'm not talking about an insect. I'm talking about an earworm, or an idea, a thought that gets put in your head that you can't shake. Imagine a jingle. That's why advertisers use it, because once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Are you ready? Here it is. Pests, disease, even weeds are not the problem. They're actually pointing us to the problem. We could regard pests, insects, and disease and weeds as our professors, not our problems. They're teachers sent free by nature for us to get our house in order, to get our crop in order, to get our garden in order. Why? They are there to point to the real problem. The pest is not the problem. The insect is not the problem. The disease is not the problem. Even the weed is not the problem. You get it? So you're telling me that these and these are not the problem? No, they are trying to point you to the root cause of the problem. Really get down to why. We don't ask why enough. Why do I have an insect? Why do I have an insect or a disease? Why do I have this weed? This is not new. This has been, geez, it's not my discovery. It's not a new discovery. It's been known for a long time. I discovered it actually from the writings of Sir Albert Howard, written in the 1940s. He pointed it out very clearly in several of his books. The pest is not the problem. That's why I repeat it. And you know what? If you look farther back, even the Bible talks about adding manure to a fig tree that wasn't producing. Well, why wasn't it producing? That was the thing. They understood and asked, why? Well, I know what I can do to make it better. And listen, they weren't the first to discover it. It was common knowledge. People have known, I suspect, as long as people have been doing some form of agriculture, they've understood that, hey, I have an insect, hey, I have a disease, or I have a weed. There is a reason why, and here's how I can remedy it. We've known for a long time that plants that are lacking something are more susceptible to insects and disease. Yes. What is that something? This is where nowadays we have tools that will help us far more than what people ever had in the past, where it was just observation. People on the land had a much keener sense of observation. Today we have tools. The fanciest tool and the most, I'd say, up to date, but tool is the same thing that if you aren't feeling well and you go, really not well, I gotta go see the doctor. One of the first things the doctor will do is order a blood test. Why? Because in your blood is a record of what you've eaten, what you haven't eaten, what you've been exposed to. The same idea can now be applied to plants. We can basically do a plant blood test. It's called sap analysis, where we can take leaves, take samples like taking a blood sample. Obviously, yeah, and there's not a lot of blood in one leaf, but you take a collection of leaves, you send them off for a sap analysis, and it gives, just like a blood type, what this plant has been eating, what it hasn't been eating, what it hasn't had access to, what the soil could be like, and what the soil and soil life are actually giving to the plant so that it will be in the state of health that it is. That's the most up-to-date technique. There are others, not so modern, but that haven't been around for that long, and one of them is a refractometer. Very simple, pretty inexpensive tool you can use, and it's used quite a bit, especially in grapes, where all you would do is take a drop of the juice from the grape, put it on the refractometer, and then you look into the sun. Well, I could see I've got a 10 Brix. Definitely too low. You don't want to be picking these grapes yet. You want to be picking grapes when they're in the really the 15 to 20 Brix level range. It's a tool that will measure the sugar content of fruit. You can use it for any fruit. You could use it for tomatoes. And then combining that with a Brix chart to give you a good idea of what is the state of health of your plant. Is it strong enough Brix, high enough Brix sugar to fight insects and disease? And it'll give you a pretty good idea of the immunity or the immune system strength of your plant. There is another one you could do that's tissue sample. You take leaves, send them off. They're not measuring nearly the amount of nutrients in a leaf as a sap analysis. It's an older technique, been used for quite a while, but it's definitely not as precise as a sap analysis. And then the oldest technique, which honestly is kind of outdated now, is a soil test. And people still say, oh yeah, you got to get a soil test. A soil test will give you an idea of the major nutrients, a few of the minor nutrients, but it really is lacking in the micronutrients. Micronutrients could be something like boron or molybdenum or manganese, copper, cobalt. Those are usually in concentrations of parts per million. But when you have insect damage or disease, it's usually due to one or more micronutrients not being available enough to the plant. So these are tools, and tools are super important and useful to give us an idea of why this plant has this insect. And this Japanese beetle. Why? Well, I know the plant is pretty good, but it's not there to be at its best level where it will absolutely repel these insects. Let's look at a few examples. I said the pest is not the problem. The disease is not the problem. The weed is not the problem. Well, hey, I've got this plant that's very often considered a weed, dandelion, or dandelion, depending where you're from. And the simplest thing, if you've been brainwashed by ads, you associate weed, I gotta solve it, bam, weed killer. Put a weed killer, get rid of dandelion because it's a problem. It's not. It's an indicator, and it's a great indicator. I suspect, highly likely, in this spot, your soil may be lacking in calcium, at least the topsoil. That's why they have such long roots. I did a video on dandelion to explain it's a great indicator. Another example, here's a pest. Aphids. Oh, what do? If you've been brainwashed by ads, you got a problem. I need something against aphids. You want to kill them. Why? Well, because I don't want aphids on my plant. Yeah, but you say, you know what? You've progressed. You no longer reach for the chemical version or the synthetic chemicals. Now you say, I'm looking for an organic solution against the aphids. So to do what? To kill them. Okay, so you still want to kill them, right? Yeah. Oh, okay. What about if you look at them as an indicator? You're not asking why. Why do I have that pest? I know why I'm having this pest on this plant. I don't have it on fruit trees surrounding me. There should be aphids on the fruit trees. No, but they're on this plant. Why? Because it's a sunflower plant. In the sunflower family, it's perennial sunflower. And you know what? It's just too shady here for a sunflower plant. And so these plants have gradually been getting weaker over the years, and the aphids are really there to basically eliminate it. It shouldn't be here. The conditions have changed from when I planted this, and this was wide open. Now it's getting closer to woodland. Sunflowers unless woodland sunflower, most sunflowers just do not grow in this amount of shade. I'm trying to find apple scab, and I can't find any apple scab. This is pear scab. It's not exactly the same, close enough. But I'll describe it for apple scab. So every disease, there is a reason for it. And we're now knowing that, at least with apple scab, it's due to a lack of cobalt. How much cobalt is running around in the soil and in the air? Tiny, tiny amounts. We're talking parts per million. And if it's 2 parts per million lacking in the soil, that disease can show up. Why? Because the plant is just not exactly nourished enough to to form a really good, strong, waxy surface. Waxes, oils, fats on a plant are a sign of good health. A fat animal is a sign of good health. Not always the case with people, but for plants, you want that fat or that wax to be there. It's a protective layer. And if it just doesn't form properly or not enough, it's because there isn't enough, in this case, of cobalt. And that brings us to the real crux. Let me give you a little primer on the whole notion of limiting factor. This is not new. It's been written about in the 1800s, and the one who's popularized the idea was Justus von Liebig. And it became known as Liebig's law of the minimum. And really it referred to a plant will grow until it's limited by one element. I talked about cobalt, but it could be nitrogen, it could be phosphorus, it could be whatever the element that is in short supply at that moment. Just to be very precise, Liebig's law of the minimum states, and let me quote it, that the growth is dictated not by the total resources available, but by the scarcest resource, or the limiting factor. That's where that whole idea of limiting factor came from. It's a brilliant realization. So basically, a plant can grow until I'm short of one thing. If you provide that element, it will grow again until it's short of something else, and so on and so on. Now, just because it's short doesn't mean it's not going to grow. It can grow, but it can grow in a way that compromises probably its immune system. Yeah, you can usually tell. Sometimes the leaf color will be different, the veins will be a different color, but overall it just shows that yes, it grew, but it was compromised, and it won't be as strong or as healthy as it could be in that zone. So here, for example, you would have, during that period, it grew, but it was compromised. It didn't have enough of a certain element. And then later on, it could do better, like it did better here. If your approach is, oh, I had an insect, I better get out the insecticide, you're probably making the problem worse. Why? Because by applying an insecticide, you probably will kill, maybe not, the insect that actually was making the damage, but you are very likely also killing its natural predators, which are found usually not that far away. So what you're doing is you're kicking the can down the road. You're postponing the real problem. Why? Because what happened? You never asked why. Why do I have this insect? On some of our plants, I know that the damage isn't caused by an insect which is there to affect the plant. It's because we have so many bees that look for leaf material to build their nest that they actually eat some of the leaves. They don't eat them, they just cut them out as nest material. So if I misdiagnose that this is a pest, well, what do you want to do? Start killing your bees? No! We don't ask why. Just look at how you search. You have a problem. I have aphids, for example. I have aphids. Your search may very well likely be, how do I get rid of aphids? When you should really be searching, why do I have aphids? Or what are the causes for aphids on a rose bush? That's an actually more precise search, and you'd actually be getting closer to the real reason why. Aphids, I said, they are actually an indicator, and they're a really good indicator that your plant probably has an improper amount of ammonia in the tissue. And ammonia really attracts aphids. Why do you have ammonia in the tissue of your plant? The aphids are trying to tell you. Why? Well, you have to go back a little bit. You probably applied too much nitrogen. Even too much compost can do it. So, well, what do I do then? If you say get rid of them, the easiest way to get rid of them is stop applying nitrogen for a few months, maybe a year, maybe a couple years. That plant doesn't need that much nitrogen, which then builds up as ammonia, and the aphids are trying to tell you, knock, 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 too much. We see this problem repeated in society. Hey, we have this problem. Let's fix it with the quick fix. Maybe, oh, you know what? There's a deficit. No problem. Let's print more money and we'll solve the problem. We'll deal with the inflation in the future. We'll deal with the mounting debt in the future. What is it? It's really a kick the can down the road. And so when you're looking with growing plants, it's the same approach. I have a problem, boom, here's a solution. Kick the can to next year. Oh, I have this weed, boom, solve it. Kick the can down you've never responded, you've never addressed why do you have them. You're kicking the can down the road. What happens? You really become like that hamster on the hamster wheel, and you're just running. We see a problem, we react. We look to wipe out the messenger without asking why. What are we doing? We're putting it off later in the season. We don't care what the consequences in the future will be. Next season, this season probably. We don't care about how it'll affect the soil. We don't care about how it'll affect the soil life. Well, I care. That's why I make these videos, because I want you to start to realize that, you know, the pest, maybe it's not the problem. That weed, maybe it's not the problem. That disease, maybe it's not the problem. I care for nature and all the parts that don't have a voice. Do I have all the answers? Absolutely not. But understanding the complexities of nature is really a lifelong pursuit. But there are certain patterns that emerge if you take a long enough time frame and look at it from that perspective. I love my audience. I care for you, and I want really what's best for you. Even if that means sometimes I body slam you into the boards, because getting the truth is not always easy, and sometimes it disturbs. And disturbing is disturbing. But I know for the long term, it's what is really best. And I hope that this earworm will chew at you. That's my prayer for you, that it would bother you, disturb you, until you change directions. Change away from things that really destroy the natural system, compromise the food you eat, and turn to a direction that is really more aligned to nature. You have a few fruit trees, fantastic. Or you're planning on adding some. Fruit trees can be a lot of work unless you minimize maintenance by, first, you're gonna design your planting. Then you'll probably order and plant your trees. Finally, you'll have to maintain your fruit trees, and that can be the most important part. This year I've done almost nothing in this orchard. We did a little bit of pruning in the spring, late winter. A lot of the orchard is not even pruned at all. Then we did have a little bit of mowing. So normally I don't even mow. I mow in the spring once or twice, and then I don't mow all summer. But this year we had such a wet summer that I did mow. Usually I just run a roller crimper through the orchard in July and August so that the grass is laid down, and it does a great job. As far as spraying goes, this year, zero spraying. Think, wait a minute, spraying, you have to spray if you're growing fruit trees. Well, if you design right and you choose disease-resistant cultivars, and we were fortunate we had a very dry spring, I didn't spray, and the trees worked well and the fruit turned out well. One part of maintaining is irrigating. We have an irrigation system under each of the trees, and it's watered automatically with a simple controller. You can, even if you have 2 trees in your yard and you want to water them automatically, you can get very simple battery-operated controllers that hook up to a garden hose so that your trees will get watered on the schedule that you choose. Look into it, because making sure your trees water regularly is just an important part of maintenance. You don't want to lose days in the year where the tree is just parked and stopped because it doesn't have enough water. So consider irrigating, and especially consider irrigating automatically. Please don't stand out there with a garden hose and water your trees by hand, unless for you it's therapeutic. Most people's biggest concern about growing fruit trees is, what do I do about insects and disease? Don't I have to spray? Well, we covered spraying for disease. Just choose the right cultivar so you don't have to spray. But what about insects? Well, insects, you got to distinguish. Is it affecting the leaves or it is affecting the fruit? I am no longer concerned with insects that can cause some damage to leaves. Why? Because they're a non-issue in our orchard. But insects that cause some damage to fruit, yes, we do against two of the insects, codling moth and apple maggot fly. Both of them, we set up these traps. Codling moth traps, we set them out around bloom, apple bloom time, and they work very well. The insects go in, they drown, and that's the end of that. For apple maggot flies, we set out these sticky traps, which are meant to simulate an apple that's ripe, and the insects come and they get stuck and they die that way. So both of them prevent me from, don't prevent, but avoid having to spray. Isn't that what you're aiming for? Trees in your yard that you don't have to be spraying? It can be done and you can do it. Choose wisely and trap as needed. So with minimal maintenance, what can you expect as results? Are you going to get perfect fruit and perfect leaves? Probably not. But you know what? You'll get some damage, maybe on the leaves, maybe on the fruit. Is it acceptable? I usually aim to get 50% quality fruit. And yeah, for some trees like plums, it's way more than that. For pears, it's still way more than that. Apples, depending on the cultivar, we can get around 50%, or some of them even a little less. And those are the ones we sort out to get rid of those trees. Because you know what? I want easy, low maintenance trees. And every climate, every country has trees that basically you could say they kind of grow like weeds. You hardly have to do anything and you get good results. That is really the goal. If you only have room for one or two trees, or if you want to put in a small orchard and you get trees that you planted them, you maintain them for a little bit to get them going, and when they begin to produce, you get quality fruit with minimal maintenance. That is the goal. And it is possible. Often if you buy a tree, the places that are selling you the tree almost always sell you more than just trees. They'll sell you treatments, how to keep the tree in great shape. Chemical inputs, sprays, get you on the treadmill, and then you keep coming back and back and back. Choosing wisely is so important. Get weedy trees, fruit trees that are weedy, that grow so well that you think, this is growing like a weed. Because that in the end is going to make it so much easier for you to reach your goal of minimal maintenance. You want to find out all about getting low maintenance fruit trees? Check out our maintenance course at permaculture.study and start today for free. Design is the cornerstone. It's the basis. It really is designing your fruit trees to go away from the image you're probably used to, which is you're growing an orchard, you're going to have an apple orchard or a pear orchard or a peach orchard. No! Run away from that monoculture mindset. The design I'm talking about is integrating the second point, which is diversity, right into the design of the orchard. So we use a simple system. Originally, it really worked well to think lazy. I called it the NAP system. NAP, N was nitrogen fixer, A was apple, and P was pear or plum. That was the original design. But as we evolved the orchard, we realized, you know what, that's not really representative, because in some parts we have fruit trees and we have nut shrubs, in the case of hazelnuts or other nut species. So now we call it trios. And that's where it's 3 trees is the basis for the pattern, and it integrates that diversity right from the start. And it's so much nicer to have not just the same thing. You can harvest different fruit types, you can harvest at different times. And the other part of the different times is because we have a whole orchard, we schedule rows by harvest date. Even if we have pears and apples or plums in the same row, they all are harvested in a 10-day window, and we call it the grocery store concept. So that design is important. It's designing to get away from monoculture and integrating diversity. But diversity goes so much further. We don't just diversify our orchard with the trees, we diversify trees, shrubs, and perennials, and then we have the grassy aisles. So each of those are important to adding your diversity. Trees, great. So they're diversified, and that gets me to about 60 to 80% of solving all the problems. Then having trees and other plants underneath, primarily fruiting shrubs, herbs, flowers, and perennial vegetables added underneath. So for each tree, for example, we'll put a couple of fruiting shrubs. They could be gooseberry, they could be black currant, they could be red currant, they could be haskap, and rhubarb, we consider that a shrub because they get to be very large. So just adding plants underneath, you know, if you don't add something underneath, something will want to grow. So you decide what you want to grow under your fruit tree. And then we have the grassy area that you will need some way to access. Maybe you're putting them in a lawn, so great, have the lawn. But don't necessarily keep it as a lawn. Use this grassy aisle space to grow wildflowers, to add flower diversity, which will attract wasps. And that's the third element, having and inviting insects and birds to do a lot of the work. Springtime, birds take care of all the caterpillars in our trees. That's fantastic. Summertime, some birds, but mostly moves to wasps. And wasps, maybe, I don't like wasps. They are the most useful insect with the fruit trees. So if you don't like them, work on it. Allowing birds and insects around your fruit trees is important. As a wildlife biologist, I could not wrap my head around the idea of spraying for an insect while at the same time it kills a whole lot of other insects, or spraying for a fungus and killing all the other fungi around. We need to understand we can have a functioning ecosystem around our fruit trees. I call it a permaculture orchard, and we need many more examples of permaculture orchards all around the world. Will you have one? We saw trios. I like to call those trios the horizontal trios because it's the trees as they're laid out. 1, 2, 3. That's the horizontal trios. And then we have the second design concept, which is layers or vertical trios or biodiversity. I can call it many things, but it's that adding the extra oomph, the extra diversity, the extra layers to the idea of trios. So now imagine we had trios, 1, 2, 3. That's our pattern. Nitrogen fixer, fruit, fruit, nitrogen fixer, fruit, nut, or nitrogen fixer, nut, nut. That's the possibilities for the tree trios. But now we get a vertical trio. And for vertical, I mean the first layer of the vertical are the trees that we talked about for trios. The second layer of this trio that's vertically is everything that's underneath. Now we're talking about the shrubs. Well, actually, it's more of a trios plus one because there's really 4 layers now. But for the shrub layer, we can put 1, 2 to 4, probably even to 6 shrubs per tree. Now you go, wait a minute, how can I put 6 shrubs under a tree? If you have a standard size tree, a large fruit tree, you could put 6 shrubs under a tree. But let's aim to get 2 underneath a tree. That's the model I'm aiming for. So you have one shrub on one side, then you have your tree, and then you have another shrub on the other side. So there's your second layer, which is shrubs. And the shrubs that I like to consider using are, I like gooseberry a lot. It's my favorite small fruit. And if you have a favorite, grow it. If you say, I love this, and if it grows well, then grow it. But I love it for the taste, but I also love gooseberries because they produce in the shade, in the semi-shade especially, and they don't produce well in full sun. So you want something that does underneath the trees, because now it's underneath the trees, in a space that normally, well, in conventional orchards, it's actually an herbicide strip. It's actually nuked so that there's no vegetation growing. We want vegetation because if we don't do something, vegetation will grow there. So let's grow what we want to grow. That's the idea of the layers, is you're growing something where something would normally grow anyway, but you're directing that growth to things that you want. So using gooseberries is a great choice. We also have blackcurrant. Blackcurrant is kind of just the secondary. It also will grow in semi-shade. It likes a little more, so it'll still grow and still produce in semi-shade, but watch them, and when you see, wow, they're not really producing much, now you have too much shade. So either you prune your fruit trees, or you're nitrogen fixing, or both, or you aim to move them to a sunnier location at the southern side, or no, at the sun side of your tree. Another one is red currant, and red currant is really is good in the early years, but when you reach probably about year 6, 7, when the trees are fully grown, it's too shady for them to properly produce. They'll still grow, they'll produce a little, but they will ease back. So that's my observation on those three: gooseberry, blackcurrant, and red currant, in their shade tolerance. Another one that we use is hascap. That's not that well known nowadays yet, but it's also used to be called edible honeysuckle. It's a great one. It is a semi-shade. It'll grow really well in full sun, as opposed to gooseberry, which won't grow well in full sun, but it will grow and it will produce. So hascap is another one. 1, 2, 3, 4. A fifth one is aronia berries. That can get pretty high, so it's not just a shrub that keeps underneath it. It will grow to 4 or 5 feet. That's getting a little bit big for the shrub layer. We want something that usually stays to about 3 or 4 feet. But you can use it as well. I would say you can even use low bush blueberries if you're in the right conditions. It is a smaller shrub. It can grow in a partial shade. Consider it. It's a possibility. Another one is amelanchier, or Saskatoon berry. If it's a full Saskatoon berry, it grows to be large enough that I now actually put them in the space of a tree. So I started by having them as the shrub and found, yeah, they need more room. So I now plant them instead of a tree, because they'll go to 3 meters. They're slow growing. They'll take a long time. They'll take longer to reach that full size than a tree does. But when they do, they're well worth it. The last two technically aren't shrubs. They're in the shrub layer, and they're there because they take a volume. I call it, it looks like a shrub. One is raspberries, and you think, well, raspberries, yeah, well, the raspberries can grow up. They're canes, so they're not technically shrubs, but they take up the space of a shrub. So use raspberries in the shrub layer. And the last one is actually a perennial plant, that is rhubarb. And rhubarb, I used it and I have lots of it planted, but I'm seeing now after 10 years, it is no longer able to build up its reserves properly to produce well. It'll be there, it'll grow well in the spring, but it doesn't seem to store up enough sunshine in the summer to give a vigorous boost or a vigorous growth in the spring. I may be wrong. Maybe it's lacking fertility, maybe it's lacking manure or compost, but from what I'm seeing, it worked really well for the first 8 or 10 years. And after that, it's just kind of there. Even though we're not harvesting it much, it's just not producing as much. So I think it needs a little more than that semi-shade. It really needs a little bit the south side of trees. So consider that as a shorter term crop, not as the final crop for long term, because that shade condition is shady underneath a tree. Now perennials. So we went, what's the one? Trees, second layer, shrubs. Now the third layer, perennials. And we have tree, one tree, shrubs, two shrubs, perennials under each tree. I aim to get 16 perennials under a tree. And that number can vary for you. It's simply based on our block spacing, which is 8 feet between trees. Now, we'll look at spacing. Don't say, oh, he said 8, so I'm... Keep going in the course and you'll see, well, I'll explain the details and intricacies and the art and the science of spacing. The reason I say 16 is because of that spacing. So the idea is I want a perennial every foot. And why every foot? Now that reasoning came out just by observation and just by serendipity, really, is I was starting to see that the mulch was disappearing. And it's the worms and the range that a worm can reach. So if a worm has a hole here from a perennial and it comes out and it goes 6 inches this way and all around the hole, if I have another hole 12 inches away, now you get from this one 6 inches, from this one 6 inches. And it's the simply practical point of a worm will cover the whole area if holes are spaced 1 foot apart. And I say holes because of the plastic mulch. But if you're using any other kind of mulch, the worms will still be effective in that range. They'll be effective in the middle as well. So that's where I spaced it as a foot plus. Most perennial plants do well if they're given that spacing of every 12 inches. So the ones I use are all of the onions. And when the onions, what is it? There's a book called Roses Love Garlic. Roses. What family are roses in? Oh, the rose family. What family are all our fruit trees in? Apple, pear, plum, cherry, apricot. All rose family. So what do roses love? Garlic. What family are garlic? The onion family, or the Alliaceae. The alliums also known as. So anything that's in that type is a good complement to the fruit trees in the rose family. So I use Egyptian onion. I use chives, lots and lots of chives, and lots of garlic chives. If you want to grow one plant that you want to try garlic chives. You'll replace garlic almost with garlic chives. And then we go into perennial scallions. We have wild garlic, or it's also called ramps. That's a fantastic one. I don't have enough. We're multiplying the ones we have because that's something that we should grow more of. But the point is, whatever onion family plants you have, grow at least one, preferably many, under each fruit tree. So that's your perennials. How did I get to 16? I said 1 each foot, and there's 1 row on each side of the tree. So that's where 8 on this side, the tree row, and 8 on the other side, and that's how we get to 16. We also put in herbs in here, so thyme, rosemary, sage, any other herbs that I've tried a few. I haven't tried them all, that's for sure. But if you're like more medicinal herbs, grow them. We've put lavender in there. Whatever the conditions, and always put them in, try them, move them around, or multiply them and try them in different spots to find, wow, they really do well on this side of the tree or on that side of the tree. And so that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to find where is that plant the happiest, and then just keep multiplying it and putting it in that happy zone. Another one are perennial vegetables, and there's sea kale, and there's perennial arugula, and there's the flowers like daylily, which are edible flowers, and just keep putting in diversity. And that's why I say this layer is diversity. This is where you diversify your planting. But it's a whole other layer. Now, you say it's layers, right? We talked about the trees, the shrubs, the perennials, but we also now have a fourth layer. So it's trios plus, because I can't help but limit it to that. And there are many other layers. We could consider the whole mushroom layer as a layer, but I'm keeping it simple. Let's stay there. You could say, well, we could grow perennials for the root. Yes. So perennials can have many different. You can have plants that are ground covers, that are rampant in covering area. Yes. I call them perennials. So you can get complex. I like simple. I have a hard time thinking of more than 3 things. And so that's why it's like trios plus. So the plus is a climbing layer. So we have our trees, and on the case of our nitrogen fixers, we can add on to them a whole layer that then, and this was the big, wow, this is exciting, because now our nitrogen fixers, which in our climate, there's only seaberry, which can be a nitrogen fixer in that zone, in that role, and produce fruit, and only the female shrubs of seaberry. So now our other nitrogen fixers can have a vine climbing up them, and that vine, the main 2 we use is grape and kiwi. So we aim to have at least 1 vine per nitrogen fixer, not per tree. So now get this clear, because in the beginning I put climbers on everything, and I quickly realized no, because we would have, I remember having a climbing bean, just an annual climbing bean that climbed so vigorously up the apple trees and produced so many beans that instead of the apple tree being like this, by late summer that apple tree was crumpled over in half under the weight of beans. So I've been there and I've done that, and I don't recommend you grow your climbers on your fruit trees, but I do recommend you grow your climbers on your nitrogen fixers that are not fruiting. So my honey locust, the black locust, the Russian olive, all of the ones we're using, we want to have grape, either 1 grape, either 1 kiwi, or 1 grape and 1 kiwi. We're trying all 3 combinations. And that is really wonderful in boosting your productivity. So you have fruit, 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 not nitrogen fruit, fruit. That makes it nice. So we're using that space, we're creating diversity, and we're really boosting up the production from the orchard and the taste and and it just makes it so much better. So how many plants does it take? And this is where I said diversity, but it takes a lot of plants. Let's look for 1 acre. How many plants? That's 0.4 hectares. We put in 1 acre at the spacing we're putting in. Again, caveat, go get further deep into spacing for the trees you're going to use, on the rootstock you're going to use, on the species you're going to use. We use 450 trees in an acre. How many? We said 1 tree, 2 shrubs. Oh, so 900 shrubs in that 1 acre. How many perennials? We said 1 tree, 2 shrubs, 16 perennials. Ooh, do the math. That gives 7,200 perennials. You better get planting. You better get multiplying your perennials if you want to fill them in. And it takes a lot of plants. So Get multiplying, because that actually ends up being the most costly part to fill in if you're buying plants, is the perennial layer. How many vines does it take? Come on, some of you are quick, I know it. You're saying, well, he said only on the nitrogen fixers, if there's 450 trees, so there's 150 nitrogen fixers, so at least 150 vines. If you're putting 2, grape and kiwi, but I don't recommend you try 2 on every tree. Let's say 150 to 200 vines that you would use. Total, a minimum of 8,250 plants if you're using the 4 layers and you're filling the space. Some of you are thinking, 8,000 plants. Yeah, it takes a lot of plants. Get multiplying, get propagating. If you're only using trees, shrubs, vines, which I said perennials takes the most plants, you still need 1,050 plants. Did I say get multiplying? You better get on the propagation course, because I'll show you how to multiply these in an easy way, in a far less costly. And it's not hard. It's just a little bit of cookbook, and we'll get multiplying in that course. So that looks at the trios that are now vertical: tree, shrub, perennial, and vines. That adds the vertical layer, that adds diversity, and that adds productivity. Take a deep breath. What are you breathing? It's oxygen, but it's mostly nitrogen, and the same applies to plants, the soil, and even water. So is nitrogen fertilizer a crazy ingredient to use for agriculture or gardening? Air is 78% nitrogen, about 21% oxygen. So manufacturing nitrogen with what? It's mostly made with natural gas today. What's the consequences of using synthetic nitrogen? Yes, let's be honest, it gives a bump in yield, especially in the early years of use while you still have organic matter in the soil. With time, adding more doesn't give you a corresponding rise in yield. It burns up your organic matter because soil wants to maintain a carbon to nitrogen ratio. It also ends up mining your soil. Why? You're just stealing from future generations instead of regenerating the soil. Unless you use nitrogen fertilizer in smaller, more frequent doses, it leaches into the water or runs off during a rain. It emits nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas 256 times more potent than CO2. If it's so bad, why is nitrogen fertilizer still used? Well, follow the money. I'm getting to the trees that will save you from this fertilizer and from ever having to use nitrogen fertilizer again. What did plants do before the advent of synthetic nitrogen? Organic agriculture doesn't use synthetic nitrogen, and it still produces. Yeah, it uses manure, composts, cover crops, and even some organic sources of nitrogen. Did I discover this? No! It's been well known for field crops and lawns. How did I first hear about this? I discovered it with permaculture, and permaculture really introduced me to the idea of nitrogen fixing plants in the form of trees and shrubs. Yes, I knew about it for perennials. Yes, I knew about it for some annual vegetables, beans, peas, but trees and shrubs, that was the discovery. Now I use the idea of putting trees and shrubs extensively in the permaculture orchard, where I haven't had to add fertilizer for the last 15 years since I planted. What trees and shrubs do I use in the permaculture orchard? Stick around, I'll give you my top one coming up. But one of the ones I use the most in the permaculture orchard is honey locust. And not just any honey locust, I use thornless honey locust. Because thorns is a thorny issue. It's no fun dealing with spikes and thorns. So get the thornless one. It's not the best nitrogen fixer, granted, But you know what? It's a great support species and support in more than a way of supporting the trees around in the orchard. It also supports grape and kiwi. So now this tree becomes a fruitful tree, not just fertilizing tree. It also is a tree that fertilizes and produces fruit. That's a plus. Don't underestimate it. One of my favorite nitrogen fixers, or at least potentially, this is a controversy, does it fix, does it or doesn't it? Check the comments, I'm sure you'll see the controversy. But this is Eastern Redbud. I say even if you don't get much nitrogen fertilization from this tree, just the beauty of it in flower is worth the 10 days of the year that happens. But it's another choice. It's another option that you could use with your fruit trees, with your lawn, with your garden. And it's beautiful. Get that? I said trees and shrubs. Here's a shrub right now in full bloom. Autumn olive. And I know people hate on this plant. It's an invasive. It's taking over. Look, nitrogen fixing trees and shrubs are earth restorers, earth repairs. They're there to bring the soil back up to fertility so that if it was a forested area, and it should be, because if you're able to grow trees, it was probably forested at one point, so that the forest that is best suited for that area can grow really well. Too bad you can't smell this, because the smell, the fragrance of nitrogen fixing trees and shrubs is really important for your health, but also to attract a wide variety of pollinators and beneficial insects. A lot of times the flowers can be quite small or quite big, but you can just hear the bumblebees buzzing around in here. These trees, or this shrub, is fast growing. How well does it fix? Look, they're on a scale. Some are way better than others, but you know what? They're all trying to make the site better. I did say fragrance, and boy, this is almost peak bloom. Buffalo berry, another nitrogen fixing shrub, hardy. This is able to grow in the prairies. This is a tough plant. It doesn't grow very large. Maybe you have a small yard, a small garden, and you can't put a tree. Then think of some of the smaller shrubs that will fill this void. Certainly fixes nitrogen, certainly attracts beneficial insects and pollinators. But this one also will give you some fruit. Not great, not as good as autumn olive, and not as good as some of the other ones, but it's really the ability of these plants to replace nitrogen fertilizer that is their strong point. These plants make your soil better. Another nitrogen fixing shrub, Carragana. This shrub loves a lot heavier soil, more clay. We're in extreme sand and it just has never thrived here. But wherever you are, there is a whole range of trees and shrubs. Look up nitrogen fixing tree or nitrogen fixing shrub for your area. We're at the northern end, or the coldest end of what is possible. I would be quite certain that there is a lot more that you could use than what I could use. It's another one. It's a possibility. Not for me. Back to trees. I said shrubs, trees. Here's one, a bit controversial as well. Kentucky coffee tree. Not a fast grower by any stretch. And how good is it at nitrogen fixing? I'm not sure. You know what? I said it's a continuum. I look at how well it's doing, and the better the tree grows, the more it's able to capture sunlight and put the fertility into the soil. This one is so-so. It's a possibility, but certainly not if you're in a hurry. One of the best for its ability to fix nitrogen, well, certainly one of the ones that grow the fastest, at least on our site, is black locust. These were seeded from a little seed, and the seeds are tiny 13 years ago, and they've become the largest trees in our permaculture orchard. They're a great nitrogen fixer, one of the top, and you know what? They're thorny. That is something to consider. If you've got a smaller property, you really don't want to contend with thorns. So I'd say avoid thorny in preference. You have choice, there are options, and thorny is not a trait that you want to be dealing with when you're pruning or just going through the yard and risk getting impaled, because some of these can be quite large in the thorns. But the growth and the ability to capture some atmospheric nitrogen and replace fertilizer is really quite important. Another controversial, in this case, tree is Russian olive. I know some people in some climates, this becomes weedy. And I like to say, you want to grow an orchard of weeds. Weeds in that you put trees that grow extremely easily. If this is growing really easy in your site, then grow it, because there's nothing better than easy. If all you have to do is keep cutting it down, then you've got material to really improve your soil quicker. Because in the end, that's what these trees and shrubs are trying to do, improve your soil, whatever your climate, whatever the water you get, whatever your moisture regime is. So these Russian olive, one of the things I like about all the nitrogen fixing trees and shrubs is that they flower after my fruit trees are done. What does that do? Boy, in the years when maybe the fruit trees didn't flower as much, or they did, and then the nitrogen fixing trees and shrubs flower a lot as well. Wow, the bees, the native bees, not honeybees for me. I don't want honeybees. We got too many native bees as is. So the bees get such a great store of pollen and nectar. So these help really increase and extend my flower succession. And just for that, they would be really important and valuable as an addition to the orchard, but they do far more than that. This is a beech here. This is an old beech, and that these trees are growing when a whole bunch of other trees and shrubs just won't grow because it's too poor. They are the first stage in getting this site back into shape after years and years of neglect. Maybe you starting in a tough place. Maybe your soil has been neglected. Getting some of these trees and shrubs to work and reverse that degradation is really, really helpful. One tree I don't have that's one of the best nitrogen fixers is alder. And there are alders for pretty well every climate in the temperate climate. And they certainly will grow way farther north or colder from where we are. I just never got any, and try them out. They're really a big shrub, not so much a tree, although the European alder is. But alders, from what I've seen, are some of the very best at improving the soil. If you're not sure how the soil is getting, then dig at the base of your nitrogen fixing tree or shrub. Check it out every once in a while. See how much it's darkening your soil, improving it. See how the plants around it are growing. No tree, no shrub, pretty weak growth in this area. My second favorite shrub for fixing nitrogen is this gumi. How good it works, not certain, but I say second from the top because it fruits, which is a real bonus when you figure it's nitrogen fixing and it produces fruit. That's a twofer. We have it next to our apple here, but that's part of our trio system. So it is meant to fertilize the fruit trees on either side or the nut shrubs, whatever is in our trios. But the ability to stay smaller. You may say, well, it's in my climate, it grows bigger, and probably does. In our climate, it actually winter kills some years. So it has to regrow from everything that was above the snow to regrow. But you know what? This year it's flowering and it will produce fruit, hopefully, and I'll get to try it. And then it might move to my #1 spot. #1 nitrogen fixing shrub is sea berry. Why? Because it produces fruit. It fixes nitrogen. It suckers, so it gives you more plants. Can be a pain if it suckers too much. You need male and female shrubs to produce fruit. And normally from seedling, these can be thorny, but these Russian or Ukrainian cultivars are thornless. Great trait. And these, yes, the fruit is amazing. I did say they fruit. Yeah, and it's great fruit, either eaten fresh or transformed. If you plant these, you'll get fruit. If you plant some of the other nitrogen-fixing trees especially, or shrubs, and they don't produce fruit, then check out this next video and you'll get fruit. Do you consume wine, grape juice, fresh table grapes, or raisins? Any of these? The industry doesn't want you to know this, but I want to show you how you can start your own vineyard for free by, if you like any of those grape products, growing grapes in your own yard can be so easy. Your backyard, your side yard, your front yard, your vineyard. Go buy a few plants. You'll see that it doesn't take long. Calculate, here's a shrub. Same thing with a grape. $10, $15, $20, depending what you're buying. Calculate how many plants you would need to make your own vineyard, and the cost can be substantial. I'll get back to the vineyard in a moment. Grape, or Vitis, is the genus name, has more than 80 species in the family Vitaceae. Really, a grape is a woody vine that can climb with these tendrils, and they can reach 60 feet up or 20 meters up in a tree. Botanically, the fruit is a berry, which can be almost black, can be green, can be red, or even amber colored. Grapes are a great source of calcium, phosphorus, vitamin A, and all grapes contain sugar. It's this sugar which makes them excellent for being eaten fresh. They can be pressed as a juice, and the juice which can then be fermented to give wine. The reason there is so much variation in wines stems from these cultivar characteristics and the wide variety of soils and climates where grapes are grown. There are lots of early references, the Greeks, the Romans, and going further back than them, where they reference wine and grapes. You ever wonder why? Why were they mentioning it? Why was grapes already so well grown? Because they're so easy. Do you think they had access to the garden center that they could just go and buy grapes? No, because grapes are so easy to multiply. How easy is it to grow grapes? Well, when you realize that a grapevine, before it's pruned like this one, after it's pruned, I'll have less than 10% of the grapevine left. That's a lot taken off of a grapevine. The important point for growing grapes is to have trained it when it's early, to go up, spread out, and there's many techniques to train the grapes. And once you've got that original setup with the vine and the branches, then you get spurs that are renewed and you renew the canes. That's all there is to it. That's why it's really so easy. You realize though, the big secret for grapes is how easy it is to multiply it so that you can get grapes for free. You're going to prune a grape, you can get 10 to 100 grape plants from one vine. Whether it's your own vine and you say, I love this grape, it's a great grape. Maybe it's a neighbor's friend or family's. Maybe you have access to some vineyards nearby and you really love certain grapes they have. Ask them if it's possible that you can get some of what they pruned. I'll show you how easy it is to cut and multiply any branch that you're cutting off. You cut off, this is a cane, you snip and give yourself 1 or 2 nodes. That there is a future grapevine. That's all it takes. You take this, stick it in the ground up to the top node or the top bud, and that will come out as a grapevine. The first ones to discover this must have thought, man, this is so easy. Well, they didn't have these, but they had other ways of cutting. Maybe they bit it off. And then they would multiply and produce more plants. Because if they were walking around and looking what is growing wild, and they came upon one that they said, wow, this grape is really nice. Then learning this technique, they had everything they needed to multiply it by 10, 50, or 100 times. I have probably, conservatively, 100 grapes I could make, or grapevines that I could make from this one grapevine. One of the expensive things for grape growing is the structure to support grape and the weight of grapes. So growing it as people traditionally did on trees is a great thing. You have a fruit tree, but you can't reach most of the fruit. Or you just planted a fruit tree and you want to keep it small, within reach, without using a ladder. Keep your fruit tree small by this trend of going and moving from large trees to smaller and smaller trees hasn't stopped. It started with apples, but now it's in pears and plums and cherries and a lot more to come. It makes sense. Why? Because you don't have to be picking these really tall standard trees where it's far more dangerous picking on a ladder than picking from the ground. However, saying that, realize that a well-formed, standard, full-size tree is really a thing of beauty. But it has to be trained, it has to be formed to keep it smaller, but it can be productive. Literal ton of fruit is possible from a standard tree. If you want to better understand how to limit fruit tree size, you have to understand grafting. Why are fruit trees grafted? Simply for the predictability. You take any kind of your favorite apple. That tree has been grafted to keep the quality of the fruit that you expect. If you take a seed from it, you'll get a variable result, but you won't get the same thing you were expecting. So you have to vegetatively propagate it. And how are these trees made? Always with a rootstock, a graft union, and then the scion, or the cultivar, or as people say, the variety of what tree you want. That's the predictability, and you'll get an exact copy, an exact clone of that tree. You want to find out more how to propagate your trees or any plants that you may have? Check out our propagation course at permaculture.study and start today for free. Now, since you understand that your fruit tree is grafted, if ever your tree dies, as this one did, realize what dies is the cultivar or the variety that's grafted on. Chances are your rootstock is not dead. And so the new tree that's coming out from the ground is not going to be your golden russet or your gala. It will be the rootstock. You can graft onto it, you can change it, you can even divide it and probably get several trees out of it. But can we get more out of the grafting process? Absolutely. And that's the beauty and the reason why we can now control the size of fruit trees by choosing the right rootstock. So rootstocks come just like golden russet or gala. They don't usually have names, they have numbers, and each one is associated with a certain size of the tree. So rootstocks go in a range from standard, which is about 90% of a seedling tree, all the way down to ultra dwarfing rootstocks, which give a tree that's only about 15% of the seedling potential tree or the standard tree. So that's a lot smaller, and there's a whole range of sizes in between. So you'll have dwarf, semi-dwarf and standard, and percentages in between. But that's the beauty is, you just need to know, well, how high do you want your tree to become? And if you choose the right rootstock, chances are your tree, without any intervention, without any pruning, will limit itself to that size. Isn't that amazing? Plant breeders have done such a great work at selecting rootstocks to give you size. But wait, there's more. Some rootstocks even give disease resistance to whatever you graft onto it. So for example, your Gala may be more disease resistant when it's grafted onto a M26 rootstock, for example. One of the biggest reasons people switch to dwarfing fruit trees is they begin to produce quicker. So the tree is younger and it produces. You don't have to wait till they're 6, 7, 8 years old to produce their crop. You get it the year after you plant, or in 2 years they're already producing. That makes a big difference, especially if time is of the essence. You may be saying, that's fantastic, we should all be planting dwarf trees. Wait! There are some drawbacks to dwarf trees. One, they may not be strong enough to support themselves. They may need a post or a wire trellis to hold them up straight. Otherwise, you end up with a crooked tree. Another drawback is that dwarf trees are not as cold hardy. If you're in a northern or a southern, depending what hemisphere you're in, you may not be able to put the dwarf or the really dwarf trees, and you may require a standard tree, which are hardier, able to take more cold in the winter. Another point is dwarf trees, because they're smaller, they don't have as far and wide and deep of a root, so they may need irrigation. Another reason for dwarf is maybe you say, I want to plant my tree and it'll be for my great-grandchildren. Dwarf trees are much shorter lifespan. These live about 30 years and then they die. So if you want a long-lived tree, look at semi and especially standard size tree, which can live 100 or 150 years. Now you can make plans for future generations. So how small do you really need your tree to be? Realize that when you get to the really small 6 feet or 2 meters and less tree, your tree will produce less fruit because you need branches to produce fruit, and the small trees have a lot less branches. However, you got to realize that you think, well, it's dwarf, so it's going to be a smaller fruit. No, the fruit size stays the same regardless of what rootstock you choose. So your standard tree will be just as small a fruit on this cultivar as your dwarf tree. Isn't that a nice advantage to dwarf? When you're considering buying a fruit tree, please check the tag. It should say what type of rootstock that this tree is grafted on, which will give you the ultimate size of the tree. And look it up if you don't know, or ask, but please be clear to know what size of tree this will give. Otherwise, it's really disappointing to get home, plant it, think it's going to stay to be 8 feet high, and that tree will go and continue past 20 feet. That's a big difference. So check and ask if they don't have it, but preferably get it right on the tag. Your soil will also determine the size of your tree. The more fertile and good your soil is for that given fruit tree, the larger the tree will grow, especially while it's young. And that's so important because once the tree is fully producing, it pretty well stays at the size that it is. But if you have a really poor soil or a sandy soil like we have, your trees will naturally end up being smaller just because of the soil quality. There is a limit to how small you can keep a tree based on the rootstock that you use. There's two ways I consider: naturally small or forced small. So naturally small is like this whole orchard block. We have not pruned these trees. So they have taken on the size that naturally is for that cultivar variety based on the rootstock they have, which is great because it's a whole lot less work. If you want to keep them artificially or forced small, pruning is not the best way. If you prune the tree, you'll do one of two things. you will cause the tree to delay fruiting. You'll make it climb, usually gets bigger. You think, but I'm pruning it to stay smaller. But you are ending up causing that tree to remain in a juvenile stage longer. So your tree will continue to grow branches for longer. What you want is that tree's branches to go, I'm old enough, I'm gonna produce, and you'll get a branch that will start, produce flowers, produce fruit, and the fruit will naturally, after 1 year, 2 years, weigh the branch down. That's the ultimate. Because now you have a tree that's producing earlier, staying smaller, and it will produce more as well. You can get there by training the tree as well. That's a much nicer way than pruning it. So you're making those branches go from tree to fruit tree with a little intervention, but well worth practicing and using. An often underestimated way of making your tree get bigger or keep it smaller is using or not using fertilizer, preferably organic fertilizer. But if you fertilize, especially while the tree is young, when you plant and for a few years, that tree will grow faster while it's young. If you don't fertilize, it won't grow as much and ultimately will be a smaller tree. So up to you. How big do you want it? The type of pruning which I use the most, especially for fruit trees, and gives absolutely the best results is, let's do a countdown of the 15 pruning types there are. We'll start with the 2 most extreme examples of pruning. One of the most extreme techniques of pruning a tree is to cut it right down to the ground level or very close to ground level. It's an old technique called coppicing, and it works even with something like fruit trees. In this case, a Spartan apple tree was cut right to the ground many years, 10 years ago, and it's since regrown very well. The key is to cut above the graft union, but it grows back, as opposed to something like a conifer, a pine or a spruce. If you cut that tree down, it will not regrow, the root will die. So conifers are not the same as deciduous, and I'm sure some of you would even give me an example of a deciduous tree which won't regrow. But nature is always full of examples to show that, you know what, there's always some exception to a rule in nature. The second extreme example is a radical pruning of the top and the roots. Let me give you a little story to explain that. The first time I saw this, I couldn't believe it. I went to the Montreal Botanical Gardens and I looked at their bonsai collection. And in that collection, there were trees that I knew they could reach 100 meters or over 100 feet or over 30 meters. And I thought, wait a minute, it says 120 years, and this tree was only 2 feet high or 60 centimeters. I thought, how is that possible? How can this tree have been alive for 120 years and still just be that high? That involved extreme pruning of both the top and the roots. And I just thought, man, trees are so malleable. They'll stay alive, even though we do some drastic things to it. So that's pretty extreme, to keep a tree that would normally be massively tall and to keep it more than 1/50th or less than 1/50th of its potential size. All other forms of pruning are much less extreme. Some can be quite drastic, like this technique called pollarding. A pollard is another old technique, was used for many reasons, depending what you wanted out of your regrowth. The keys to proper pollarding was, one, to select the height at which you wanted to pollard. And a lot of times people would do it at a height that made working the tree or pruning at it easy, within reach. If they had animals, and a lot of pollards were in fields where animals would graze under the trees, they would simply pollard higher so the animals would not eat the regrowth, but the tree would provide shade, would give them some leaves that if it was cut during the season. A lot of times people used pollards in drought or periods where the grass wasn't growing. So you could pollard for that. But basically some of the important points was to start your pollard while the tree was young. Why? Because then it forms a really good head or knob, whatever you want to call it, and that allowed the bark to properly heal around, and each year when you would have a new growth and you would prune it out, these cuts were quite small and would allow it to heal over. Normally the rule for pollarding is you want to cut it back every 1 to 3, 4, up to 7 years, depending what you wanted to do. Obviously at 7 years, you were making a pretty big cut, but it's still depending on the growth of the tree and the species. You basically want a tree that could be maintained at a height you determined. For the goal you determined, maybe you've been to Europe, there's a lot of pollards in France, Switzerland, and other countries in Europe where street trees are pollarded. And the reason is they just want the tree not to touch the buildings because streets are pretty narrow. So they could have a tree, provide shade in the summer, but be pollarded, be kept to a certain size. It involves more work, but you can have the tree and have the benefits of it while at the same time maintaining it at a certain size. So this is one I'm just playing with, experimenting with. It's a honey locust, but it works. It works for a lot of deciduous species, not coniferous species. Please don't take a large tree, an old tree, cut it and say, yeah, I'm pollarding it. No, that's not pollarding, that's butchery. Another somewhat extreme way of pruning is to cut almost all the branches off of a main branch to get new growth every year. This is used in the case for nurseries that are producing scions or material or new growth branches to be used for grafting. It's extreme, but it's very useful if you want a lot of propagation material. If you're enjoying this video and you want to find out the specifics for your tree or trees, check out my pruning course at permaculture.study and start today for free. Another type of pruning is where you will go through your tree and only remove dead branches, also called dead pruning. It's really kind of the first step of pruning, so it's a good practice, removing the dead branches, and ideally you want to get them right to the trunk. You remove that whole dead branch completely. Another type of pruning is to remove structural branches. Branches that are really competing to be the trunk, to be the main trunk. I don't have a good example because I prune them out pretty religiously as soon as I see them. But one of the keys to structural integrity, to keep one single trunk, is to find those secondary shoots while the tree is young. If you waited 20 years, I'm sorry, but you've got a disaster waiting to happen. This is the one that I've seen the most happen, where people have left a branch that should not have been left, and eventually it cracks. When these crack, imagine this little branch, after 20 years, it's not so little anymore, and the break makes a huge gash in the trunk of the tree. I like to call these bum cracks. Anytime it's a acute V, not a U, but a V angle, it's not a victory. That V is basically a sure sign. Usually you'll see a line, that's why I call it a bum crack. You'll see a line right in the valley of that V. Get that secondary or smallest branch cut as soon as possible. They're the ones that will cost you and cause the most damage to your tree long term. So get them out while the tree and that branch is young. I like to say, trees are really malleable. They're kind of like clay in a potter's hand. You're starting to see how, wow, you could really make the tree do many things. Yes. And the next type of pruning is really protection pruning. It's where perhaps you have a branch reaching over your house and that branch is kind of sketchy, or you have a branch that's rubbing at your window. Those branches are kind of obvious. Unless they're really solid, they should be removed. Look, any big branch removal, the best time is when the tree is completely dormant in the winter or before bud break in the spring. If it really has to be done, it has to be done whenever you can do it. There are better times for each type of pruning, but sometimes you just got to get it done. Maybe you want to prune to lift the crown of your tree. The crown is where you form the ball or the pyramid, depending on the tree's natural form. In our case, we do this. We want to lift the crown. That means there's no branches well above our head for these black locusts because they're thorny. I don't want customers coming to pick and hitting branches of these thorny branches. So we just lift the crown. Maybe you're in the city and you run a lawnmower and you don't want to be hitting it with your head as you mow under or near the tree. Lift the crown. As the tree gets older, you also want to raise that. Cut the bottom branches. Keep cutting if you want to do it. Doesn't mean you should not have low branches. In some cases, absolutely keep those low branches. But where you want access, easy, lift that crown as the tree gets older so that depending on your goal, street trees in any kind of environment are pruned so that a car won't touch it, a bus won't touch it, or a big truck won't touch it. So the first branches are above that. That's what you really want for that raising of the crown. Maybe you want to see. The next type is really called vista pruning. It's basically allowing you to see something. Perhaps in the summer, you don't see out of your bedroom or your living room and you say, you know, there's such a nice view that we see in the winter when the leaves fall, but we don't see it in the summer or from spring to fall. That's a great candidate. So do some pruning, and it's very selective. I like to say, if you want to do good vista pruning, you get one person to stand in the window and you just go along and shake branches. And if they say, yeah, that one's in the way, okay, then that one comes out. And then you go, yeah, that one, then that one comes out. And you gradually create that vista or that window or that opening so you can enjoy the view that you've already paid for, but you may only be limited to a small time of the year. And it's not cut the tree down. You don't need to. You can open a window, often just by removing between two major branches, removing all the smaller branches, and then if you have to, you remove one or two major branches. Done selectively, done carefully, and sometimes done with a ladder, carefully, safely, you can really create and open up those beautiful vistas. Are you grasping that pruning really comes down to, it's a bit like a permaculture principle, it just depends. Grasp that it depends. What's your goal? What are you trying to achieve? Why are you wanting to prune that tree in the first place? The more you can narrow that down, the clearer it becomes what type of pruning you need. So you can have the effect you desire and safeguard and protect and keep the integrity of the tree. A common technique of pruning or type of pruning is to prune to form a hedge. It's also called shearing, and you can use shearing on so many species. It's really a very common method, but the key is you want to start while the tree is young. Don't start taking a big tree and saying, yeah, it's going to become a hedge. That's drastic. But while the plant is younger, begin shearing it, and it will sprout out more branches at every cut, and it will get thicker and thicker as time goes on. And eventually you can have a great hedge for privacy, a great hedge for wildlife. You can even have a so-so hedge to produce some fruit. But a hedge is so versatile. In many cases, go ahead and try it. A variation on a hedge is called a fedge. It's a fence hedge. It basically is the two combined. It used to be, and it's an old technique, where people had pastured animals and they needed a fence way before the era of barbed wire or electric fence. They used trees and some shrub species, but mostly tree species, that they would cut into, lay, and that's why they called it laying a hedge. So they would lay these branches down, weave them together, weave other pieces of wood together, and it would form an impenetrable barrier, even for sheep. Deer wouldn't go through it. It's a multi-purpose, a lot of work to do it well, but it exists, and in some parts of the world, especially in the UK, there are lots of great examples of fedges. Another type of pruning, it's also called tapping. You may have heard of rubber tappers. In our climate, it's tapping for maple, walnut, this is a walnut, or birch. They will all bleed or produce sap when they are tapped. So it's been around for a long time. It involves making a small cut. You can cut in at the trunk. You want a large enough diameter of tree so that you're really not killing it, because you are extracting a portion of its energy that's going up to regrow the tree. And so you want to wait till the tree is sufficiently large to tap into it. But it's been used for a long time, and it'll give you some very sweet results. The next type of pruning is one of my favorites. It's really not pruning at all. Think, well, you're talking about pruning, and that is a type of pruning. It's to not prune it. This eastern white cedar has never been pruned. It's never been sheared. It's never been cut. It takes on a totally natural form. And I've experimented it with fruit trees, and it's really makes for a lot less work. Maybe you have a young tree that's ideally a seedling or a very small transplant, and you've never touched it. I would say don't prune it. If it was planted in the right place where it's not a danger to the house, you don't need to open up a vista, for whatever reason you don't need to touch it, then don't touch it. Let it take on its own natural form, and it will be a thing of beauty without pruning. There are many forms of pruning that can be used in fruit trees to shape them. And a lot of times they involve pruning to get the tree to a certain shape. For example, a vase shape. Look, if you want me to go deep and do a video specifically on the forms of tree training, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, there's really quite a lot. There's books written on the types of training and involving pruning that you can do to give your tree all kinds of shapes. The type of pruning which I use the most, especially for fruit trees, and gives absolutely the best results, is pruning to thin the branches. Why? Because nature is always abundant and always gives you more than you need. Even in the case of branches, there's always more branches on a tree than the tree absolutely needs. Why? Because you get storms, things happen. Even if the tree gets naturally pruned in a storm, it's okay. So normally in fruit trees, we can cut down the number of branches by half. So we only aim to keep 12 to 15 branches, and will give us a full crop, and even a better crop than if we left all the branches on that tree. Do you have a fruit tree? Do you feel more confused after watching pruning videos? Pruning has evolved since I started 30 years ago. Stop making the same mistakes and do When I learned this simple 3-step technique, it immediately cut my pruning time by 80%. And I finally understood why I cut off branches and which branches made all the difference. So the first step is clearing a chimney. Very simple technique, very simple to understand. A chimney, you got a chimney, it's like a pipe that goes around an empty space. This is the inside of your stovepipe, and you have a pipe running all the way along your trunk. And just like a chimney, what does it do? It moves air. Well, that's what you want this to do. You want it to move air so that the core of the tree stays drier. You also want it to bring light. So it's a conduit for light and air. Both are important. Light will stimulate new branches where it's needed. So that's the why of clearing a chimney. What is clearing a chimney? I like to use my hand as a measure first. So I just put my hand over the branch and I take off anything that is not the main branch. What's the main branch? I consider a branch anything that's grown at least a foot in a year. So if this was on the trunk, this is more than a foot or 30 centimeters, I would leave it. Why? Because it could be a good future branch, but that's step 2. We're not there yet. So in this case, this is the main branch. This is the trunk, but I have a small branch here on it. I don't want it. It's in my chimney. So I just cut it off. Keep going. This one, clear, no problem. This next one, clear, no problem. This one, oh, not clear. There's a couple of little branches. This one, yes, that's in my chimney. Take it off. Okay. And you go boom, 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 up the tree, clearing a chimney. Is that hard? What does it do? Well, it stimulates the tree on the core to regenerate branches if needed, and it gives it air. You say, well, okay, but the books didn't tell me that. The other videos don't say that. I know there's a lot of misinformation or telephone effect information over the years. Look, I would say whatever you read or listen to, make sure that the people telling you that have actually done what they're saying and done enough of it to understand. I'm not saying it's all bad. I'm saying pruning has evolved. There are new techniques. There are new knowledge that has come around in the last 30 years. That is so much better than what was done before. The chimney is the first step. If you want to learn the fine details of pruning and training your trees, check out our pruning course at permaculture.study and start today for free. Step 2 in the process is selecting 12 to 15 branches. Why 12 to 15? You don't need more than that many to give you a full production of fruit in your fruit tree. If you count your tree, chances are you'll have more than 12 to 15. So that gives you an option. Not bad to have more, it's options. Then you'll choose which ones to remove. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's count this one. So we got 1, 2, 3, one behind, 4, 5, 6, and then we go higher. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 branches. We got 19 on this tree. Do we have more? Yes, we have more. So we'll be able to take some out. But which ones? 3 simple acronyms. LBL. Low branches, big branches, and line branches. How do you know? Yeah, the simple one is don't worry about the low ones. Keep a couple. If you have low branches, well, how do you know what's low? It's 4 feet and under. If it's 4 feet and under, they're in the low. Technically, you could remove them, but I don't remove them anymore because I get rabbits and I get voles that will chew the tree. But if they have branches, they'll chew the branch. And those are my sacrifice branches. I leave them for them. So leave a couple of branches low, always good insurance. Then the second one is big, LBL, big. Or you could just say BL. Big is, what's big? How do you know if it's a big branch? Where it attaches, so where a branch is attached to the trunk, just look. If it's 50% or more the diameter of the trunk where it's attached, then it's a big branch. Measure it. If that's this much, and your trunk, obviously that's not 50%. But when you get to half, you'll see that branch is half the size of the tree trunk at that point of attachment. It's a pretty good measure, and chances are if you have that, that big branch is actually up. It's trying to be a tree. It's trying to replace the top. That's a good candidate to remove. Yes, it's a big cut, but it makes a big difference in your tree. So take off the big branches, and you may want to limit, if you have a lot of big branches, then start with the big ones that are the highest up. You may have one that's really like this. You may have one that's about like this. So start with that. Don't take off more than 2 big branches in a year, because if you remove all of your big branches, you will throw your tree out. You don't want to take off more than 30% of the volume, or 1/3 of the volume of the tree in any one year. Third one is the branches that are in the line. How do you know if it's in the line? Well, I have a line here, a row of trees. So a line is any branch that I've got heading right into that tree next to it, or right out into the aisle. So kind of a 90-degree, either there or there. Those I don't want. What I do want is branches that are out like an X pattern, this way and the same on the other side, so that it leaves room between trees to have other branches. Always keep in mind, do you want a tree or do you want fruit? You want to finish off with branches that are at or below horizontal. That's what you want to end up with, but you may not get there in a year. Chances are it'll take you 3 years to get to branches that are fruit bearing, not tree branches, but fruit branches, and just focus on those. The third step, already at the third step, is a final polish of your branches. Now that you're down to 12 to 15 branches, we haven't even touched on the branch, which is where people spend most of their time telling you to prune. No, this part is so easy you could do it blindfolded. What do I mean? You take your hand and run it underneath a branch. And yeah, with my eyes closed, you just follow the main branch, and anywhere you hook onto something, I remove. Well, the nice thing about the polish is once your branches are down as fruit branches and you've done the polish, you only need to do this about every 5 years, because the branches take a while. What's left takes a while before they migrate back underneath the branch. Beautiful step. But you do want to clean it up. So very easy. Same with this one. I could run my hand, do it blindfolded, run my hand. Whoop, here's one. So what do? You have to cut it. No, you don't have to cut it. I can just snap it off. And I can come in and whoop, here's another one. I can snap that off. Here's another one, snap that off. And go all the way, whoop, here's another one. Why do I do it getting what's underneath? Because they're already shaded by the branch. They're underneath. They're not going to give you as good a fruit because they don't have the amount of light needed. They won't be as colorful. They won't even be as big. So take those branches off. Leave the ones that are above, that are getting full sun. And you don't mess with the whole thing of the branch. Let it go. Let it produce. Let it flower. Let it fruit. The weight of the fruit will make your branches go down. It's such a simple 3-step. You see, we're already finished the 3rd step. Go along each of your remaining branches, and because you only have 12 or 15, you don't have a lot to do. Go under, close your eyes, just take it, break it off, and you're done. That's the simplicity of this 3-step technique, that you could do 2 of the steps every 5 years. Do your chimney and do your polish, and you're good for about 5 years before you even have to touch it up again. And then you're left with selecting your branches. Well, how many new branches you're going to have? If you've kept your tree to 12 to 15, you're not going to have a crazy amount of branches. applying this simple 3-step technique, it will absolutely revolutionize your pruning. And there's so many other details that you could get into. Check out my pruning course at pruningcourse.com. And you could start for free today. Just check it out. See, is there anything more? But apply these 3 techniques to start pruning your fruit tree in a way that's transformative. Have you ever wanted to grow and pick delicious fruit? Well, you can if you grow the easiest fruit in the world to grow, which is, are you a glass half full or glass half empty type of person? Do you focus on what is hard or what is easy? The same applies to growing plants and fruit in particular. If you're in the tropics, trying to grow an apple tree, that's not going to be easy. It probably is impossible, at least to get them to fruit. In the same way, if you're in a temperate climate like we are, trying to grow mango, that won't be easy. It'll probably be impossible to get it to fruit, unless you're in a greenhouse. The climate you're in has its limits. And climate is really a combination of temperature and rainfall. If you're in a hot climate and you have very low rainfall, you're actually in a desert. If you're in a hot climate, but you have abundant rainfall, then you're in a jungle. And each area has its associated plants. We tend to know some plants associated with our climate. We could know plants that are from a different climate that are growing in our climate because of the season. Let's take, for example, tomatoes. Tomatoes are actually a tropical perennial. Imagine that. They grow and they grow years in a tropical climate. But we know them in a temperate climate as a summer annual. That's a very different situation, but that's the effect that season has on plants. And yes, tomato is a fruit. What about the soil? Some plants prefer a sandy soil like we have. Other plants prefer a clay soil. Some like it dry and some like it wet. We can get even more specific. If we're in a mountainous or a hilly area, some plants like the sunny side of a mountain. There's other plants that rather grow on the shady side of the mountain. We call it the aspect of the slope. So you can see how climate, temperature, rainfall, season, the soil, and even as specific as the aspect of a slope can affect what plant can grow there, and specifically what fruit can grow there. So what fruit is easiest to grow? I would say the one that grows like a weed on your property. What do you need to grow a weed? Nothing. You're not seeding it. You're not transplanting it or planting it. You're not fertilizing it or watering it. No pest protection, no disease protection. Gee, you're not making any effort of any kind to grow it. It just grows. It's a plant that's destined to grow on your site at your succession stage. Gee, maybe it's derogatory to actually call it a weed. We should call it a wonder plant. Can a fruit be weedy? Absolutely. On our farm, if we do nothing, we get wild grape and wild native cherries taking over the property. We got to beat them back. This is the original grapevine. When we first planted the permaculture orchard, I left one wild grape growing. I've since topped it to 12 feet several times. I would qualify this grapevine as absolutely weedy. It's produced dozens and dozens of young all over our farm and in the surrounding areas. Wild grape growing like a weed. Could we do something with it? Sure, we could harvest the wild grapes. We could transform some of them into juice or jelly. I leave it for the birds. So if you have a wild plant that is fruiting, that is weedy, you could also graft onto it. Grafting is as old as agriculture, and you can take a grape in this case, that has superior fruiting quality and graft it onto the wild one. You could do that with all kinds of fruit. My grafting mentor, Maurice Chaudière, used to have a definition that I love about agriculture. He said agriculture is the bringing of culture to nature, and grafting is an element of culture that you apply to the wild or nature. He used to take wild areas and convert the trees that were there to fruit and nut that were superior. We could do that in our areas. We could take trees and go from wild to a fruit and nut garden. It's possible with grafting. We can also use the wild species as a clue of what cultivated equivalent grow best and easiest on a given piece of property. For us, it's the wild grape. So when we plant a cultivated grape, we get an easy plant to grow. The same for wild cherry. How would you know what fruit are growing wild on your property? I would say the easiest is to find when that plant is in fruit. When it's in fruit, you go, yeah, that looks like a grape. So this is a wild grape. But it can also be where you look for it. So I always tell people, go along the hedgerows, go along ditches, go along hedges, places that are not regularly mowed, where these kind of plants that are perennial, that grow for several years before they fruit, that's where they can get established. I'm excited because now we're starting to get mulberry coming up in hedgerows. You may need an app, and there's lots of apps that'll help you identify a plant while it's young. There's no fruit on it. So just get used to using an app to find the plants. And once you identify one of them and you recognize the leaf pattern and the leaves, then when you start looking around, you'll be surprised at how many more are growing on your property. They're not fruiting yet, but they are growing. So using those plants as an indicator to growing something. So now I know that when we grow mulberries, because we have mulberries coming up as wild equivalents, well, our mulberries will grow much better. So what plant is the easiest, or what fruit is the easiest to grow for you on your property? I would say the plant that grows like a weed. Plant its cultivated equivalent, and it will be the easiest fruit to grow. Have you ever heard the expression, if I had to start over again, I would do X? Well, if I had to start over again and knowing what I know about farming and gardening after 30 years, here's what I would do. The first one is, what would you want to grow or raise? Is it pear trees? Is it grapes? Is it fruit? Is it an orchard? Is it raising chickens, raising cows? Do you want to have a homestead and you want to do all of that? That's so important to understand and to know what is it you want to do. I usually divide it into two. Is it plant-based or is it animal-based? Do you love working with animals or do you really love being around plants? That distinction is a really important early start because it will determine what kind of property is best suited. Where should it be? What exactly do you need? See, I'm trying to focus you in already. Do you know what it is you want to do? Next, I would say, okay, you know you want to focus on plants. Maybe you want to focus on fruit trees. The second point is why? Why is it that you want to do that? Do you want to give a whole lot of fruit to a food bank? Do you want to have fruit like I did and raise an orchard, have an orchard, really so you can attract more birds? That was my why. I knew I wanted fruit. I knew I wanted an orchard. I knew I wanted diversity, but I knew it had to be a way of providing habitat and getting more wildlife. What's your why? Next, I'd say, learn as much as you can about what you want to grow or what you want to raise or both. Learning. Why? You go, well, how deep in the details? You want to know what's involved in it. When I started, I didn't even know what a rootstock was. I didn't even know how a fruit tree is built. I didn't understand any of it. I just wanted to get out of the office. Yes, your why, get into it, get interested. If you have a hard time learning about it, maybe it's not for you. Or maybe you don't like the learning part as learning like you're doing now through a video. Maybe it's YouTube, maybe it's courses, whatever it is. If you don't want to learn, maybe you want to learn by doing, so you want to apprentice, you want to intern, you want to work with somebody, that's fine. Know how you like to learn. But if you have no motivation to learn about it, maybe you shouldn't even be thinking of that for the future. Start your nursery. You have a place, you're living somewhere, start at your place. You don't have a place, maybe you're in an apartment, start at family, can you do that? Or you have friends, maybe ask them if you could use a little piece of their property to start some plants. Worst case, they're left with a lot of plants, or you pull out most of the plants and you leave them with a gift of a whole bunch of plants. Start your nursery. It's probably the place you'll save the most money. Take 1,000 plants. It doesn't take a big space to grow 1,000 trees or shrubs. And give it an average value. If it's trees and shrubs, $10 each. What do you get? $10,000 of value for you to start your project. So get your nursery going wherever you are, wherever you're at. And the nice thing about a nursery is it's a ticking, not a time bomb, but it's a ticking clock. You can't leave your trees or shrubs there for 10 years. 2 years is kind of the limit. After 2 years, you better get going and find a place to plant them. So start your nursery today, but knowing that you have 2 years to find some place where you can then transplant them and get a good start to your project. Get 2 trios put in. You say, I do have a little bit of room. In this case, pear. What's a trio? Well, it's 1 nitrogen fixer and 2 fruit trees, or a fruit tree and a nut tree. That combination, get 2 of those started and you will start learning. You will have plants that you can then multiply. You can have plants for your nursery. You'll really get a good start. And you know what? You learn as much with 2 trios as if you had 2,000 trees. So start by getting those 2 trios in. They're the most important start for any of your projects about growing, and certainly growing fruit, and certainly growing in the idea of a permaculture orchard. If I had to start over again, I would place mother plants at friends, at families, in your own yard. Why? Because a mother plant is going to be the mother to many, many examples. I could take cuttings, I could take tip layering, I could layer plants, I could multiply them, but I have to have a plant that I could put this from, get these from. Maybe you say, I don't have friends, I don't have family, I don't have a place. Put them in a public area, plant them clandestine, be a rebel, and get some in a public area that you can then go back and you can get seeds from some plants. You can take cuttings. You're not taking the whole plant, you're just taking some cuttings. You're getting those plants established so you can keep coming back year after year and harvesting many examples. I say if you have a plant and it's a well-established mother plant, usually it takes 3 years and your plant is now big enough to take this plant, this currant, blackcurrant. Looks like I could take 15 or 20 cuttings from one plant in one go. Well, if you could do that every year, you would be multiplying the number of plants you have by 10. And that's just such a nice strategy to get going, and get going quickly to increase. If I had to start over again, I really would have to answer one simple question. Are you growing these or raising these in the case of animals, or both? And is it going to be just for your own use? Are you going to say, I want to have all the pears I want, all the sheep I want? Okay, but is it for you or is it to sell? You want to decide that early on because it'll make a huge difference on the scale of how much you'll need to plant or raise. If you say, I'm going to have 5 trees and I'm going to make a living off of it, probably not. So that's important. You want to know, is it just for you, or is it to make a living or to sell or to have a sideline? Whatever it is, decide early. Now you know what you want to raise, what you want to grow, you know why you want to, you know what it needs, and you've probably, hopefully, got a start on plants if it's plants. So now you want to find some land. Where? Where are you going to do this? Where are you going to grow this? Finding land is, well, it's probably one of the biggest decisions of your life. What does the land look like? Well, if you've done your homework and you know what those plants, what those animals, what they are best on, what site would be best for that? If you said, oh, I want to have at least half of the area growing cherries, all right, and you say, yeah, and you know the land around here is really great, it's this heavy clay, I'd say, no, that's probably not great. We're on a beach sand, and if we let these plants grow on their own, we get invaded with cherries and grapes. That's what this land is best suited for. You have to find out where is that land that is best suited to what you want to do or what you want to raise. Don't raise sheep where it's wet and it's a bottomland. You're going to have all kinds of disease problems with your sheep. Each animal, each plant has ideal and best sites. So now you can focus. Where are those sites that are best? How expensive are they? Where are they located? What is the weather like? What's the climate like where those sites are? If you say, yeah, I want to grow mango and I'm looking in a temperate climate, it won't work. So find out those things. Start your hunt. It's like a hunt to find land. You'll spend a lot of time searching, but you know what? In the end, it is one of the things that will make the biggest difference, because when you are ready to put your plants or your animals or both on that site, they will thrive there. Time versus money. Money versus time. Where are you on that continuum? If you're younger, probably you have more time, not as much money. As you get older, you should have more money, but not as much time. Ideally, you have the option of having the money and wanting to spend the time to learn. Look, whatever it is, be clear on what's your situation. I would have loved, when I started, to have had our master class. That's why I did it, to do the tool that I would have loved to have had. It would have been the best investment for the money that I could have done to really accelerate and expand my learning to get what I need to do to put in a permaculture orchard. Check out the masterclass at permaculture.study and start today for free. One part of our masterclass is observation, and observation is the first principle of permaculture. It's so important to understand how to observe. If we observe our site, and I didn't get this in the beginning, our site is perfect for cherries and grape. Basic observation would have been to have seen that and said, well, I should switch and do primarily focused on all kinds of cherries and all kinds of grapes. Why? Because you want to grow trees, shrubs, and raise animals that grow like weeds. Why? Because nothing is easier than growing a weed. Well, what do you do for a weed? You do nothing. That's why they're weeds. No watering, no fertilizing, nothing. You don't need to weed them. They're weeds. Well, that's what you want your trees, your shrubs, and your animals that you raise. They're just so happy in this place that they grow like weeds. So focus your observational skills on your land, on your property. What grows like a weed here? The next step I would have taken would be to model the design I want. Hey, I studied landscape architecture, I worked as a landscape architect, and the best tool that I ever came up with and saw and used was creating a model, much better than a plan, but just play with your design. Work with trios in the case of fruit trees, and just arrange them, rearrange them, simulate them, and get your imagination flowing with the possibilities. Because a model is so quick, so powerful, so forgiving, so able for you to just iterate and try things and imagine things and walk through your project, because it's a model. If I had to do it over again, would I use something like plastic, which is the most controversial, most detested thing that I associate with permaculture? Oh, you can't have plastic in permaculture. Well, it depends. Knowing what I now know, I hate maintenance. It doesn't make me any money. I don't get paid to maintain. So every time I'm doing maintenance, it's money or time out of my pocket or out of my life. Plastic, in the case of a permaculture orchard, has saved me so much time, and it's for the life of the orchard. It's a one-time application, but a lifetime of savings. So if you're gonna have over 200 trees, consider something like plastic with drip irrigation underneath, and automated, so you really have a very simple, low-maintenance system. If you're growing less than 200 trees, I don't recommend it, because you could use wood chip mulch. You could use large plants like rhubarb and lots of perennials and fill the space. You could do that and you can maintain it. It's doable. But when you do acres, some of those practices are good for garden scale, but not for farm scale. So yeah, I would do it again because I love saving time and I'm not paid for maintenance. Planting. Trees don't start off being big enough to support your weight. You plant them, they're small. We planted, a lot of trees were 1 foot or 30 centimeters tall. Planting can take quite a bit of time. I would say get your friends, get your family, get those who you've gotten excited about your homesteading, your fruit growing, your farming, your animal raising journey, because you gather people on the journey with you. Get them together, organize a planting blitz. Hey, have pizza, have whatever you want that will gather people, and you know what? They will be glad most of the time to help you in your journey, to give you a boost, to get you started. 20 people in a day, 10 people in a day, planting for half a day is pretty well 5 days of work. And you can get a lot planted in 5 days of work. So get your group organized. Explain to them what you want to do. Have your area staked out. You use the model, then stake out your planting plan or how you're going to lay it out, so that all they have to do is plug and play. Make it so simple that the kids will go, that's that label, it's green, that means that's going to be a green apple. Whatever your scheme, make it simple. Get help, get organized, and have fun. It should be fun. It should be a joyous occasion. And make it memorable. Make it a marker. Maybe somebody had a birth or a death in the family, and give them a tree or allocate a tree to them in memory of that person. It's a great opportunity. You got something that a few years from now, the kids will be climbing your trees. Plant smaller trees, shrubs, and perennials. You know why? Because they have a smaller root ball and they catch a lot easier than a big plant with a big root ball that gets a lot of transplant shock. Plant small, and if you're planting with plastic, you have a smaller hole to make. The smallest hole possible is always best. If you're planting with mulch, then have your mulch ready, or ideally put your mulch a year before you're actually going to plant, so that when you open up, oh, that's beautiful soil under there. Plant, put the mulch around. Your plant is not going to stay small for long. plant all the layers at one time. I didn't do that. We focused on planting the trees. And then it took a few years before we came back to plant shrubs and plant perennials. Well, you know what? I now would really recommend my young self plant all the layers, all the plants at one time, because your plants below your trees will get established fast, will fill the space, will cover ground. If you're not using plastic, even more important, they will cover the area and other things won't grow as easily underneath them. Just what you decide to put in will grow. The only one I would say to hold off on are vines like grapes and kiwi. I would say wait a couple years for your nitrogen fixing trees to grow and then plant your vines to give those trees a chance to get a little bit of height and grow above the vines. But for all the others, put them all in at once. Do a smaller area if you have to before expanding, but get it all done. Whatever you